Hey, welcome to our Be Well Expo today. We're here to talk about some addiction issues and some mental health issues from a community level. We're not here to resolve problems today, but we're here to draw awareness, to bring resources together, and allow you to hear some stories of people who have had a struggle either with mental health, with addiction, and then how they've overcome those things. And I hope today's sessions and the speakers will just be a blessing and a help to you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Our first speaker is going to be David Bradley. I met David about a month ago, maybe?
Probably
2 months
two or
ago?
three.
Yeah, it's been a while. I was up at a conference up in Lilburn. Where are you from?
Yes.
Yeah. Where are you from? You're from?
Yeah, I'm living up near Athens.
Athens,
Georgia.
okay.
I got some little football team up there or something.
Yeah, kitty cats or, no. Go Dogs, right? Anyway, I met David up there at a conference, and he came over to my table, and he said, "Hey, somebody told me I need to come over here and talk to you." And he started talking, and man, he's got a fabulous testimony. And we were talking, and he said he had written this book, and so I left the conference, and then we started working on this, putting this together. I said, I'm going to call David and see if he'll come down and share his story with us. And so I'm glad he came down because it was about a 2-hour drive for him, I think, to get down because he went through all the small towns. In every single small town in Georgia where you can get a town square that you got to go around. I think that's the way he came here today. So, but anyway, I'm going to turn it over to David because I want you to hear from him and not from me. So, David, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Housekeeping rules first. When I get anxious and my anxiety level comes up, I talk a lot. So if I talked your ear out or talked it off out front, he's got a doctor or something's going to be here for ear replacement after the thing today, and I do apologize for doing that. I normally don't talk a lot. The other things, you guys, I was a police officer. Please don't hold it against me. If you've ever been wronged by a police officer, that wasn't me. I got in it after being in construction about 17 years. I'm just trying to help. And I still got a service-minded thing of trying to help people. And that's the whole thing driving the book that I wrote. And so if I could sit down and talk with you one-on-one, that's what I thought was happening here today. And then I checked my email, and there's this agenda and Expo, and I called him. I said, "Hey, what's going on today?" Thought it's just me and your guys. We can just sit down and talk. And so I came prepared just to sit and talk to you. And I hope I can pull that off without presentation notes. So there we go. First of all, I want to start off with, I want to ask you a question. All right? I want you to think about it. Who wants this 20? Who wants this 20? Come on, guys. Y'all let me down. I thought you'd be quicker than that. All right, so what did he do? No, brother, that's yours. If you give it back, it loses its power. What did he do? He acted on it, man. He went and got it. And isn't that what we're doing in recovery? We have to go get it. We got to take back what was taken from us. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. And so, first of all, to keep in mind is the book it's Bible-based, but I tried not to make it religious. I'm not a religious person per se. I'm spiritual. But the bottom line is God loves us, regardless of how we feel about it. And it took me a long time to believe that. God loves us, and He declared it. John 3:16, He said, "For God so loved the world." And then in John 15:9, Jesus said, "As the Father loves me, so do I love you." And so I studied that verse. It says, "just as." It's the same. How's that possible, though? Because I know me. So it took me 18 months reading that verse, first thing every morning and last thing every night, to where it came from here down to here. So I know now it's true, and I can testify to it from experience. And so the trust in the process for us is crucial, and nothing happens unless we trust the process and we do the work. So when Todd asked me, he goes, what would you speak to? What's your number one thing you could tell my guys? And I'm like, it's that right there. You got to trust the process, and you got to do the work. Because there's no easy way, is there? And it's not a perfect process either. God allows wiggle room in there, because I've run off in the ditches a few times, get back out and get back on the road. And that's just under the mercy of God. So my goal here is to help, if I can, by encouraging you. I've got the book available. and just trying to share with you how we're a lot more alike than we are different. We really are. I worked in a jail for 2 years, and I was a little intimidated my first time going down the catwalk. Some guy calls out, "Fresh meat." And I started to go back. All my tools were in my truck. I could go back to I was a trim carpenter. But then as I got to meet those guys, a lot of them had been in construction. I'm like, man, they're just like me. We're the same. Had the same hopes and dreams and desires and things that they wanted in their lives. And, things got a little bit sideways for them. And so with that in mind, I still, even after retiring 14 years ago, I still got that heart to try and help somebody in that journey, wherever you're at. So the backstory for me, I got PTSD out of childhood. It took counseling to uncover it. My father was a violent alcoholic. My mother divorced him, married an even more violent alcoholic. And that was the beginning of my hell on earth, coming up with the violence, which I thought was normal until I was in counseling and then found out, man, the PTSD went way back. And so when I became a Christian in 1977, and I didn't fit in the church scene. I tried for about 6 years, just didn't fit. Got in trouble with my marriage, and so I thought, man, I've got to do something. Told my wife at the time, it's because we haven't been living for God, so we gave it a shot. We found a Bible teaching, Bible believing church, and the pastor just taught the Bible line by line to where I could understand it, because I had tried to read it before and just didn't get it. Well, the denomination that my grandparents brought me up in, God was a cosmic killjoy, and you had to work hard to please him. So I still lived in that. Even though this pastor, I was sitting under his teaching, he never taught that. I thought, well, if I'm going to go all in, I've got to please God. I've got to be a better man, a better father. And I bought into that for 2 years, trying to serve God, but nothing changed. I was going after that health, wealth gospel. If you do this, you can get this. And nothing happened for 2 years. So the depression started in because now I can't please God, And by the summer of 1985, I just kept trying to find a way out. You're trying to numb that pain. It's mental pain that if you haven't been through suicidal depression, you don't know. You can't explain it to anyone. I can think about it now. I still can't talk about it. It's just the pain is unbearable. And I kept coming down, trying to find a way out. And it came down to if I was dead, there'd be no pain. And I was convinced my children would be better off without me. God would be happy. And so I planned it. I made the decision and I planned it. What do you think the result of that decision was? Yeah, I felt big time failure. And that's why another reason to be dead. But once I made the decision, how do you think I felt? What was the emotion you think came rushing in? Peace and joy. Man, I was happy because the pain was going to be over. So for about 2 weeks, I looked for the opportunity. It didn't present itself. So I pulled off on my motorcycle one day and was just sitting there like, how in the world did I get here? And I just thought, well, I'm already a failure. I wanted to go into law enforcement, but it was like a 30,000 a year pay cut. So that to me, that was a financial failure. But I thought, well, it's not as big a failure as taking my own life, checking out of my kids. So I made some changes on the circumstances and recovered from that. And then going through some hard times in law enforcement, I finally submitted to counseling because there's that stigma. Now I can't go in there and get labeled a nut. And so I just hid it, still dealing with the depression and the anxiety, and then started self-medicating with alcohol and pornography just to manage the pain. Well, that didn't last but so long. Have you found out that it's not a static thing, that addiction takes you down further, takes you a road, and it's in movement. So for me, I discovered it's always moving, and it's moving me in a direction. And then as it turns out, it cost me my marriage and nearly cost me my career. So then I submitted to some serious counseling after I retired in 2008. 4-week program, found out about the PTSD, the depression, and the anxiety, and ways to manage it, how I thought about it instead of medicating it. It took prescribed meds with antidepressant to get me out of it. I was so deep by 2010. But it was a way to, it's in our thoughts. It really is. You don't want to hear, it's all in your mind, but it really begins with the thoughts. It's how we think about ourselves is what it took for me, because I had so much self-hatred that it was toxic. And it took a counselor to point it out to me. So I just rode around in that patrol car about 80 to 90 times a day, just vicious, poisonous stuff, I would say, against myself, just constantly. And you do that all day, every day, your psychic, your subconscious takes that in. It starts believing it. And so I learned how to control those thoughts through, it was cognitive behavioral therapy. And then I started writing the book, and it just couldn't go anywhere. I needed to put some of my life story in it, but I was too ashamed mostly to tell anybody. And then that privacy, I don't want anybody knowing my business. But in the meantime, I've come to where I've become an open book, and I put things in there I'll answer any question you ask me now, because it set me free to learn to just start telling the truth. If I just admit it, it takes the sting out of it. And if you judge me for it, it's not hurting me any worse. If you walk away, we both lose. So in the process of writing that book, I thought I would have it done by 2008. It just came out, 14-year project that shouldn't have taken that long, but I was still so jacked up. It took several more rounds of counseling, and I'm currently in EMDR counseling now. So if you've been through a traumatic event or military service or something's happened to you that shouldn't have, and it's jacked you up, that therapy goes down to the subconscious part of our minds. And that's where my depression resides. That's why it's treatment resistant. And I didn't want to take the meds because, man, they just zone you out. Antidepressants and the anti-anxieties are highly addictive, so I just live with the anxiety. But that therapy, man, it just works. And so when I came out with the book, I've discovered suicide rates among firefighters. So my wife and I have just going around giving them out at fire stations, and they embrace it. It's just to try to give back and to encourage those guys to hang on. Because a lot of those young guys, man, are seeing things they're not prepared for. That pediatric call after the fire, nobody's prepared for that. And they just don't know how to manage it. There's the stigma again. And so they're just checking out in ever increasing numbers. The same with combat military personnel. Cops are doing it, but you can't talk to a cop. I know, you can always tell a cop, you just can't tell them much. And so it's hard to reach guys, even though I can talk to them, but it's just hard to reach them with the message. So I wrote the chapters that are easy from the basis of deep depression. So the chapters are easy, and I've got chapter headings of a bridge that show progress and a sense of accomplishment as you do each chapter. There's a bridge image as the previous chapters ghosted out. So you get a sense of progress as you go through the book. And it's easy to read. And there's no demands placed in there. There's suggestions at the end of each chapter. I think I called them points to consider. Just consider this. Write it on a 3x5 card and carry it around and remind yourself of who you are. And so with that in mind, my hope and prayer is that the message will reach people. And it's not a book on depression or addiction or anxiety per se. It's more about replace the negative with the positive. Because if all you do is you focus in on what you're up against, it's going to pull you down. And I'm sure you get that from Todd and his ministry. Keep looking ahead and keep going. And you do. I like the name of his ministry, The Next Step, because sometimes that's all you can do. You take that next step and then that's it. That's maybe all you can do for a day or a week. Sometimes you have to string the days together 5 minutes at a time. I've been told, just take it a day at a time, and I couldn't, so it's 5 minutes. So I can get out of bed or sit up on the bed. Okay, I can take a shower and talk my way through the day that way. So the summary of it is it's written to the spiritual side of us. On our physical side, we got the mind, will, and emotions, and that's where we get jacked up. But on the spiritual side, in my opinion, my experience, and my beliefs, all deep change happens at a spiritual level. It just does. We can go through the motions with it. I did it on a cognitive level and got the intellect involved, and it only goes so far, but it's got to go to the heart. And science has proven there's a mind-heart connection. And of course, the Bible, when it says heart, it means it's where our soul is. That's who we are, and that's where it dwells. I really can't think of anything else to share except if there's any questions, be glad to take them. You can ask me anything. I'll shoot you straight. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you and try to get it for you, and I'll forward it down to Todd. Yes, sir.
First time I met you, David, you really were talking to me about the therapy and the counseling you were going through. Can you explain that a little bit more to us?
Well, the EMDR, it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And if, I don't know if I should ask for a show of hands, but if you've ever been through like a horrific event and you see it for days and weeks after, you can't keep your mind off of it, the mind, after a while, will block that out because it's too painful to think about all the time. It's one of the hardest things about writing that book was I had to revisit some triggering things because I didn't want to put anything in there that's triggering to you guys. But you can't hardly speak about this really without having some triggering content. So once we ingrain that, we don't want to talk about it anymore. What's the point? But EMDR distracts the brain by either watching something on a screen, eye movement. You can use binaural music where the beat and the frequencies alternated. You can't tell it listening to it, and the brain's distracted. My therapist uses these things. They're little wired tappers, and they tap in my hands. They do it 30 seconds at a time, remembering an event. With the brain distracted like that, you're able to recall that event without the horror of it. So she asked me if I had a call or anything like, "What do you have a number one thing?" And I said, "I do." She asked me to describe it to her, and I told her no. They're not going to put that in her mind. But she explained she's trauma trained and she goes through prayer, God protects her and all. So I described it to her. And then she asked me, I'm going to turn these tappers on, and I want you to, the first thing that comes in your mind when you revisit that scene, she said, I want you to think about that. So 30 seconds, and that comes back. Well, she did this about 15 times, and it took me around this circular route about what happened and the feelings. And some of the feeling was like, that table had been, this baby fell through, I shouldn't even say this, but anyway, there was illegal glass imported. And the guy got away with it. And so there's always been this anger. You know, just one of my things like, man, that guy needs to be dealt with. But he got away. And so I was telling her, I don't know that this is pertinent, really. All this anger about this guy. And this was 30 years ago. But that therapy is like, what belief did you come away with? So what's the belief? And she asked me, did I feel guilty about that baby's death? I'm like, no, well, we did all we could do. The paramedics were there. I escorted the med unit in violation of policy to the hospital because it's dangerous passing that med unit at 100 miles an hour to get to the next intersection and block it. We did all we could do, but it turns out, man, I've been carrying guilt. Next month will be 30 years since that baby's death. Guilt over that baby's death, and I didn't even know I was carrying it. And that contributes to anxiety and low self-esteem and self-hatred. It's still down here cooking. It's like a computer program running in the background, that app you don't know it's draining off your power. So this therapy brings that out. Normally you can get done in about 12 sessions. I've been to about 20, and I'm getting close to the end. And it's hard. I mean, my head's throbbing now, even remembering some of the things that, have come up in it. But once I'm done, man, I can put it behind me. You guys are in this program. If you stick with it and you get out, you're going to have to do the aftercare the rest of your life. I still got to watch the way I think about things. But you're not going to be in this intense atmosphere forever. There's a purpose to get you moving on and get you back out there where you were and regain what's been taken from you. So that therapy is part of that, EMDR. It was discovered by accident only about 30 years ago, and so it's not really well known outside the military law enforcement community. So seriously, you got any more questions? If you don't want to ask now, you can ask me later. Yes, sir.
What was your challenge to get started to actually admit that you needed help? What was your awakening point?
Well, I knew there was a problem. Yeah, I knew there was the challenge was taking that step because I knew there was a problem. What would make a man sit at a computer screen for 8, 9, and 10 hours at a time? Just lost Mike.
Test. Yeah.
Look, I'll just come over here. I don't like these anyway. So I knew something's wrong, but I didn't understand it. And it turns out the thing that drives porn addiction is like most addictions is the release of dopamine. So at the core of it, beyond the chemical, is the dopamine release, which is a heroin-like substance that the brain produces. So you can't get away from it. That's why people are addicted to their phones because they've designed these apps, releases dopamine. Oh man, I've got 5 new friends. Or they liked this about me. And then they've got the scrolling effect of it. It's all about dopamine. So when you understand, man, what I'm after is a dopamine hit, essentially heroin. I want to shoot up. And I used pornography to do it because I could hide it. But I could only hide it so long. It cost me a 30-year marriage. It contributed to it because I came very emotionally unavailable and empty. Just kept everything out there, and I still have that tendency. It's like the dissociative disorder. Like, that doesn't touch me, I can move on. So to take the step and admit it, though, it's just getting desperate with it. I mean, it took losing the marriage. Like, I got to fix this thing because the next thing I'm going to lose is the career. So taking that step, and it's just the stigma that shouldn't be there. I mean, what's wrong with getting help? Seriously. And if I'd gone for help sooner, I probably would have saved that marriage. And I wouldn't be so jacked up right now. But it's just, I wouldn't listen. But then there's the stigma. Nobody wants to be thought of as crazy. And listen, we're not crazy. One of the most important things I learned about trauma is when you go through a traumatic event, it can be that you get assaulted or you witness a violent event. We weren't created for that. And the brain will start reacting to it in odd ways, but it's normal for the trauma. And so you think that, wow, that feeling I have is normal? Well, for an abnormal thing, it's not normal for me to go around with third-degree burns, but if I stick my hand in boiling water, guess what? The normal reaction to that is clear. And so with the brain, it's the same way. But if you don't know that you're not crazy, what are you going to do? You're going to hide it, it's going to bury it, and that's one more thing driving you. It's like PTSD is one of the driving things among youth right now for eating disorders and cutting. And most of it came out of sexual and physical abuse as children. It's the number one, that's what a therapist told me, the number one driving thing, driving PTSD, and it all goes back to violence done against them as children because they don't know how to cope with it. The brain just doesn't know how to understand it. Listen, I went through a shooting once, got pinned down by this guy. He shot 5 guys on our SWAT team, pinned down on me, and afterward, I wouldn't even talk to anybody about it. If you weren't there, not going to talk to them. And then I was like livid angry at my MP5. That's a Heckler & Koch suppressed subgun. And I thought, man, if I told somebody I'm angry at an inanimate object, they'll take my gun and badge, put me on a desk. That's just the way it was back then. But I've come to find out that was normal because I thought with that gun, there's nothing I can't do. I do any kind of rescue, hostage rescue is what we were trying to effect with that. And when I wasn't able to do it, I'm mad at the gun. And if I hadn't already known that about PTSD, I'd still be carrying that, just buried, but it'd still be jacking me up. You know, that virus running down deep within us that's just taken away from living normal.
So did you start with the cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy. What would that be, CBT? CBT, okay. So when the therapist started having me read these books, and I'd read the whole book in a week, come back, and he goes, how are you doing? Lousy, man, nothing's changed. He's like, well, you got the knowledge, but you haven't processed it yet. You haven't done anything to change. One of the things he did was he had me buy a box counter or lap counter, those little chrome things they use in sports sometimes. He said, every time you say something negative against yourself, I want you to click that. So, like, does it surprise you a police officer's going around self-hating on himself? I mean, you don't think of it that way, right? Because I grew up afraid of them. And you just don't think of them that they could be jacked up. Well, you may if you've experienced it, but I'm just talking about, so I was going around counting. He said it's going to do 2 things. You're going to be surprised at the number of times, and knowing the high number daily is going to get you to where you'll drop it. So 80 or 90 times a day, going around counting that thing, so I stopped doing that. And sometimes I'll pull a bonehead stunt and I go, way to go, Bradley, that was good. You know, very glorious there. But that's about the extent of it. And I love that thing. I'll call myself an ignorant wretch sometimes. That's my favorite line out of the movie Tombstone. You got to watch it. But anyway, and so but that's the extent of it. And so, and then the cognitive, the therapy was how I think about myself is how I'm going to feel. So if you want to go around and self-hate and you want to think about you can't break free, you're not going to break free because you're teaching yourself you can't. And that's the whole thing about this program is in just doing the process, trust the process, do the aftercare. It's in your mind. What are you going to think on? What do you choose to believe? And you have a choice. And you can make a difference. You can be standing up here someday, 10 years down the road, and be free, be clean, call it whatever you want, and giving the same talk and the same encouragement, and you're going to get the same looks back of either disbelief or whatever. I teach in church sometimes, and man, you get the frowners on the front lobe, and you're just like, man, why did I say something? But that's just the way it goes. It's here, if you can take something away from it, then that's what I'm trying to encourage you to do. And that CBT was great, but it's at the cognitive level, whereas the EMDR goes to the subconscious. Like when I wanted to study it, the therapist said, don't. It'll stop in your mind. You'll think because you know it, you won't do the exercises. It's very odd, isn't it? Counterintuitive, but it works.
Were you ever told to try journaling to where you wrote down your goods, your bads, your high points, your low points, and review them to see?
I did. This is where God has a humor. He called me to be a writer in 2005. I don't like to write, especially with a pen. Give me a computer, I'm okay with it. But yeah, I tried it. It didn't work for me. And I never did. I would try it, and it's great going back and looking at it, but I just never follow through on journaling. I'd rather, there's a lot of things I'd rather do than write.
The other thing is you told me what you do with the books, but why don't you let everyone else know what you do with your books when you get some
Well, we go around to the fire stations, and we just give them out, and the firefighters embrace it. We're police officers. They just say, no, I'm good. Good. And firefighter told me it's because we live alone. Have you ever been told you need to be in community with others and help you? You know that, right? You got to have somebody to call and who understands. But police officers are riding out there alone. There's a lot of fear involved. Every car you pull over, that guy may be, Arnold Schwarzenegger, get out and just spank me. Just every traffic stop was like that. Is this going to be my next spanking? Because I got a few. Sent to the hospital. Big old boys that, man, you just couldn't do anything with them. While I'm getting spanked, I'm thinking, they didn't cover this in the academy, So, but we give it out to the firefighters, and we're starting to get more into the suicide prevention and first responders things of train the trainer and get the word out there. And it's not the only word. There's better written books. I'm not a good writer. I paid people to do the cover and fix my chicken scratching all up. And it's come a long way. It still needs some more work. But there's the thing of my book is like, I'm going to go take it and give it if I can find the people who are willing to read it. And there's others out there doing the same. And there's better books out there than mine that can really help you if you're out there reading the thicker manuals. Come on, there's one more question I know. You can put me on the spot. I'm used to it. I used to...
Did you touch your EMBR experience in the book then?
I hadn't discovered it when I submitted the manuscript for final approval. That was last year, and just got into that, discovered that in March. But I'll leave you with this, and then I'll turn it back over to Todd. But there's a lot of people from high school, when they saw I became a police officer because they knew me in high school, they're like, Bradley, you? All right? So, but you can't listen to that. Don't let other people determine who you are and your value. Man, the Son of God valued you enough to go to that cross for you. And He had you on His mind when He was there. And one of the greatest stories of restraint I've ever read out of the Bible, when He hung on that cross, these priests were mocking Him. It's the priest who was having Him put to death by the Roman government, mocking Him to come down. He'd already told Peter, look, just hang on. I can call 12 legions. One angel can lay waste to the earth. So can you imagine 12 legions leaning forward, hand on those swords, waiting on a nod from the Son of God to come down? But He didn't do it. He went through it, rose from the dead. It's written down what He said. John 15:9, as the Father loves me, so do I love you. You don't even have to believe it, but it's still true. You can deny this. If you're born in a cave and I told you about the sun, what would be your relation to it? Can't describe red to somebody born blind either. And then sometimes spiritually we're that way. I stand up here and tell you God loves you, and you're like, no, you don't know me, or you don't know my life story. That's true. But I can only tell you what I've discovered and uncovered as a skeptic. I started out as a skeptic. And then, remind me of your question? That's the COVID from last year.
EMBR.
Yeah, the EMDR. Yeah, I just discovered that this year. I wish I'd discovered it 10 years ago, but maybe I wasn't ready. Now, I came within 12 hours of dying last year because I was stubborn. I went to the ER twice, sent me home. Went the third time, oxygen was at 51%. And the ER doctor said they were going to put me in ICU, and I'm like, no, ma'am. People go in there, don't come out. So give me a shot and send me home. She said, you'll be dead by this afternoon, about 12 hours now, you'll be dead. So I went, and then they told me the next 48 hours would determine whether I survived it or not. And during that time, man, I had no fear, and I couldn't pray. They couldn't even ask God to help me. But people were praying for me, and they're like, how could you not pray in your mind? I'm like, I couldn't do it. It's too weak. But I thought about God a lot. And what he asked me was, would I surrender to him regardless of the cost? It took me a while. I can't remember now because it's all a big fog, whether it took 2 hours or 2 days. But I finally did it, because what's the first thing we think about if you're going to surrender to God regardless of the cost? What's it going to take from you? What's it going to take? It's going to take my kids. It's going to take my health. And that's what we fear. And I'm sitting there arguing, knowing better. And I finally surrendered it. And then it's a process. I pick it back up. I got it. I'll do it. And then he's got to smack me again and let me just run to the end. And I can see God going, there he goes. One more time. And he'll let you run out that rope. Well.
Was that COVID that you had?
Yeah, the Delta variant. I had the Alpha variant. That wasn't too bad. It's like the flu. But the Delta? And then I got the long haul. So they said 18 months to get your mind and your strength back. Hasn't happened yet. There wasn't much mind to lose. So I got to tell you, my brain's like a BB in a boxcar, so it wasn't much. But if I could get that BB back, I'd be happy. I think I'm good.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, guys.
I want
Appreciate
to
you.
let's give him a hand. I appreciate David. He drove all the way down here. I'm going to give you a break here in a minute, but I wrote down a few things that he said, and I use this all the time. Trust the process. We get so focused on the end result, right? The end result is I want to be clean. And when all I focus on is the end result, that's a big old elephant I got to eat, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, Well, I want what you name it, and usually we're so focused on that, whatever that thing is that we want, and it's so big, and instead we should be focusing on the next step that's in front of us. When it comes to anything in life, you will be successful moment by moment, decision by decision. I love what you said, and I agree. People tell you, well, take it one day at a time. I don't know how I'm going to get through today. So I'm going to take it 5 minutes at a time. So it's my decisions in the moment, right? It's what's before me right now. That's the only thing I'm going to tackle. That's the only thing I can address. I can't address the whole day. I can only address what's right here in front of me. In this moment, what am I going to do? What decision am I going to make right now in this moment? If the decision is in front of me to use or not use, what am I going to do right now? Right? Because a lot of times when I'm focused on, I just want to be clean, have a job, have my family back. Boy, you're painting a big, and that's wonderful to have those goals. Wonderful to have those goals. But you got to trust the process along the way, and we don't like to trust the process because we want it all, right, Brad? We want it all right now. We want it all right now. So trust the process, do the work. I started telling my life story. I started putting it down on paper, despite the fact that you don't like to write. This is a good one, admit my struggles. I'm weak. I have anxiety. I have doubts. And you got to be able to tell yourself those things without being negative about those things. You just got to admit to yourself, I need help. I'm not Superman. How many of us, I had a guy years ago that he came out of prison. He was coming to church here. He was coming to the Friday night RU program back then, and I have COVID brain, just like you do. What was I talking about? Admitting your struggles, right? Yeah, and he came out of prison. He came And I'll never forget that he had all these goals and he had all these things that he wanted to do, but he could never admit the real problem in his life. He could never do that. And he kept going back, and he kept going back, and he kept going back. And it wasn't until he finally said, look, here's my problem. My dad neglected me. My mom had health problems. My brother abused me, and until we got, okay, here are the problems. Now we're laying these things out. Man, I've got some problems in my life that I need to be honest with and start talking about. Your book, it's out there on the table. Therapy Works. A lot of us sometimes end up on medication for our mental health problems. And I tell people, if you have to do that, do it. But don't neglect the therapy side of it. Medication without therapy doesn't fix anything. It puts a Band-Aid on it, but it doesn't fix it. Therapy is where it's at. The therapy is where it's at. I've got to address these problems. Aftercare, you just said, yeah, this was the other thing I was going to say that you reminded me of. Aftercare and therapy. Everybody's in therapy. Everybody is in therapy. Everybody needs therapy. I need it. It all looks different, right? Some of us go to a paid counselor. Some of us have people that we invite into our lives we can pour out our hearts to, and some of us are going to God on a daily basis. Some of us those are all forms of therapy. And if you're not getting therapy on a daily, I don't care how mentally stable you think you are. If you're not getting therapy on a daily basis, you're going to go nuts. And you don't have to be David Bradley to go nuts, right? And this is the last thing I'll say. This is a question for us. Who do we spend the most time with in conversation? Who, Turbo? Me. I spend the most time in conversation with me. And if all I'm telling myself is, you're no good, you're a failure, you've tried this before and it didn't work, you're never going to make it, you're a bad dad, you're a bad husband, you're a failure. That negative self-talk, and I love when you had that little clicker, right? I've seen guys wear rubber bands. Every time they got something negative, bam, I'm gonna hurt I'm gonna give myself a little physical pain there. What did God say you are? You're his creation. You're his child. You're his. He made you. He knows you. And I love what you said is that there are emotions that come at us that make us uncomfortable, but we're designed for those emotions because some of the things that are happening to us we're not designed for. Does that make sense? So sometimes we have been told by the world that those emotions are wrong or there's something wrong with you. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're those things, well, there's a reason that you're that way. Those emotions are telling you something. They're giving you an indication that something's not right a lot of times. Your body is telling you something. Your brain is telling you something. And so a lot of times we look at these emotions that make us feel a certain way and we're like, this isn't right. Well, technically it is right. We just don't like the way it makes us feel. But then we get in that trap and we go back to that negative self-talk and all these things that we've told ourselves, and it just drives us down a rabbit hole that a lot of times who has the solution to? Me. A lot of times I'll close with this and we'll take a break before our next session. It is almost quarter till. I don't know if you ever listened to a guy, I listen to his podcast sometimes named, John Deloney. You ever listen to John Deloney? Anybody know who he is, John Deloney? John Deloney is a Dave Ramsey type of guy. I think he's on the Dave Ramsey team. But Dave Ramsey talks about money, right? John Deloney talks about issues. And almost everybody that calls into his show, he gets about halfway through the conversation, and there was one, I'll give you an example. The lady calls in, and she goes, my mother-in-law. And she just starts down the hole, and John goes, whoa. He goes, your mother-in-law's not the problem. You are. And 90% of the conversations he has, he'll go, oh, stop right there. Your dad's not the problem. You are. What do you mean? He goes, you can't control them. You're allowing this to stick around in your life. You're allowing this to happen. You're allowing this. So, but most of the issues that you and I have, emotionally, mentally, guess who has the answer? We do. We have it. So thank you, David. I appreciate that. That was excellent. I really do appreciate that from your heart. Like I said, we're going to hear stories today. We're going to let's take a break till about 1 o'clock, and we want to grab something to drink, go to the tables out there, come back in. I'm going to do a quick session, and then I'm going to get Brad and Jody up here. You need to hear their story, okay? Don't go anywhere because you need to hear their story. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, let's take a break.
All right, hey, we're going to go ahead. Sorry, that was a little loud, wasn't it? We're going to go ahead and get started. This session is going to be a little bit more probably technical than the last one. And then Brad and Jody are going to come back up and they're going to share with us their story as well. I'm looking forward to, I've talked to Brad a lot. I've never really talked to Jody. So it's always good to hear it from the sane person's side. That's right. I want to give you just a little bit of information about kind of the vision this is our first, what we would call our Be Well Expo, okay? I'm going to give you a little bit of vision on where we're trying to go with this, okay? So I got a few slides here that I'm going to show you, and what I'm going to give you first of all is kind of some stats and some background and some numbers, right? And just to kind of build us up to where we're going with this, okay? So Dylan, next slide, please. I'm just going to kind of look at you when I want it, right? So here's our vision. Our vision is to increase community, collaboration, cooperation, and awareness concerning emotional, mental health, and substance misuse in Middle Georgia. You know, the medical community has gotten away from the term substance abuse, and they're really moving to a different term, substance misuse. And so you'll see that a lot more in literature and things like that. Just like with returning citizens, they're getting away from terminology that suggests that they're criminals, but that I forget the new term that they're using. And I can see that they're trying to maybe I don't know if you're familiar with. There's a new term, and I can't think of it now. If Peter was still here, he probably could tell me. Rob, I heard it the other day in our meeting the other day in the reentry meeting, and I can't remember the term they're using now. So, but new terminology. So you'll see this a little bit differently. So we're increased community collaboration, cooperation, and awareness concerning emotional, mental health, and substance abuse or misuse in Middle Georgia. And then our mission, help Middle Georgia communities achieve mental and emotional stability, which leads to reduced crime, incarceration, and recidivism. Recidivism is a fancy term for returning to jail. We want people to stop going back to incarceration. That's a good thing. We want people to be productive citizens despite their background, right? So next slide, please. All right, some of these numbers here are post-pandemic or pandemic numbers, but I'm going to kind of tie these together, okay? 71% say that the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a toll on the mental health of at least one of their children. So we're talking about children right now, right? So during the pandemic, where were most of our children? At home, right? At home, isolated with the parent probably or with other siblings. So that's an astounding number there. That's from the American Psychological Association. Next slide. What the American Psychological Association says about these numbers is this is the cause of our mental health decline. Number one, social isolation. Well, imagine that, right? When we isolate ourselves, it affects us mentally. That's why God tells us that it's not good for man to be alone. We're supposed to be in fellowship and communication and community with one another, okay? Remote learning, that's kind of related, I would say. Too much screen time. There's a lot of research out there. This is not just elementary students. There's a lot of research and a lot of data out there right now that is suggesting that social media and this constant access to information has a detrimental effect on our mental and emotional health. We're not designed for all this information that's coming to us. Our brain is not designed for this constant flow of information that comes 24/7. How many of you have woken up in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, something wakes you up? What's the first thing you reach for? Your phone. What's the first thing you look at? Yeah, the flashlight app. Email, Facebook, Snapchat. What's the other one? Instagram, right? Well, there's all this. And then yesterday, we had the college students from church over our house last night. And they're on their phones, they're pulling up all these different social media apps that I've never heard of. And I'm like, my word. It's constant 24/7. When I was growing up, and I'm not that old. I'm not as old as Paul Sheely. Right? But when I was growing up, the news came on at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And it came on at 6 o'clock at night. And by the time you got the news, it was a day old. So it didn't really matter, right? Things had changed. Now I get information when? And what's that do to my emotions? Because I'm watching information come at me. I call it the dawn of the CNN 24-hour news network. And that really was a game changer for a lot of things. Good to have information. How we process it has to be measured a little better. So, fear of the virus. Fear was a factor there. Lack of physical activity, that makes a lot of sense, right? Lack of physical activity. And then frightening news. Everything in the news is about bad news because bad news sells. Good news doesn't sell, so we're not going to put it on there. So we get this, and we're at home all the time. So this was what the American Psychological Association was saying were the things that were causing our mental health decline over the last couple of years. All right, next slide. What things did we compromise that brought us here? Well, they're going to be related to those things. Socializing, exercising, eating well, sleeping well, varying activities, taking breaks, talking with parents. Again, these are school-age children that we're talking about. So these were things that were hurting our children mentally. Next slide. College students. 39% of students in college experience a significant mental health issue. These numbers are way up. Not just with COVID. These numbers are way up since about 2010. So in the last 12 years, these numbers are way up. Half of mental health issues begin by age 14. 75% begin by age 24. And again, if you read anything about in our college material that related, most college mental health offices are saying that the number of students they're seeing is rising astronomically. My daughter is at school at Truett-McConnell University up in North Georgia, Cleveland, Georgia. And she said, Dad, she goes, you wouldn't believe the number of offices our school is opening for mental health on campus. They're just having to increase their staff, their mental health staff, because of the number of students that are struggling emotionally and mentally. 67% of people 18 to 24 with anxiety or depression don't seek treatment. Why do you think that is? Stigma?
Their minds are not formed all the way yet.
Yeah.
Their mind doesn't form until the age of 24.
Yeah, and they don't, and as a college student, I remember when I was a college student, I'm dealing with this. I'm not going to worry about it. I just neglect it. It's almost like a natural tendency for the college student to neglect getting help with something. I've got other things to do, right? Or there's a stigma, right, that's associated with that. When I was in the military, we used to have an office called the Mental Health Office. And I spent 20 years in the Air Force. And when I was in the Air Force at that time, I retired 12 years ago. But if you ever went to the mental health office, what did that mean, Rick? You thought your career was over. That was a stigma. So they changed the name of it. From the mental health office, do you remember what they changed the name of it to? Life Skills Office. The Life Skills Office, right? They changed the name to the Life, because they're trying to take away because there was a stigma that if you went to the mental health office, that your career was over. That's going to go in my file. I'm not going to go get help for this. So it's very real, this tendency to neglect our health, our mental health. Next slide, Dylan. Mental health of college students is getting worse. The rate of mental health problems, including anxiety and depression, has steadily increased over the past 8 years, with rates even higher among racial and ethnic minority students. So just another, this is from Boston University, some studies and some research that Boston University had done on their college students. Next slide, please. Okay, so this comes from, I subscribe to Gallup. You know what Gallup is? Gallup does worldwide polling. They do national polling. They research. If you need something researched, they're going to research it. And so they did a worldwide study, kind of post-pandemic. It was 2021, of happiness in the world, the emotional state of the world. What do you think the most unhappy country in the world was? What in the U.S.? We're not in the top happy countries, and then we're not in the bottom happy. We're kind of in the middle. What do you think? Think about countries and what's going on in certain countries.
If they actually did a poll, it would be North Korea. I'm not sure they.
Right, when they participate, yeah. The unhappiest country in the world was like Afghanistan. Yeah, the most least happy country in the world is Afghanistan. Right, the most happy country in the world, I think, was Panama. Panama was like 1 or 2. It was right up there. I was like, I need to move to Panama, right? They're having a good time. They're enjoying life down in Panama. So, but this was the global rise of unhappiness dating all the way back to 2006. And you can see that we peak out because it ends at 2021, but it rises pretty significantly up to 2021. But the rise has always been there, up and down a little bit, pre-pandemic, right? The rise is still there pre-pandemic. Next slide. There we are. You can see the percentage of people who experienced stress in 2021. I don't know what's going on in Russia, but they're pretty happy, right? In terms of stress, China very stressed out because there's extreme lockdowns in China for COVID still to this day. The U.S. Pretty green there, so we were pretty stressed out during this time as well. Next slide. Georgia. Okay, so here's some data on. So I gave you some elementary students. I gave you some college students. I'm giving you some worldwide data. How about the state of Georgia? Because that's what we're concerned about, right? State of Georgia. 1.4 million adults in Georgia have a mental health condition. Now, I would say, we can almost say 100% of us have a mental health condition. Now, these are probably people who've been diagnosed, okay, with some type of and it may be mild and it may be severe, but it's 1.4 million. That's more than 2 times the population of Atlanta. High school students with depression are more than 2 times more likely to drop out than their peers. 68.4% of Georgians aged 12 to 17 who have depression did not receive any care in the last year. Now, I asked that question to Peter Leary earlier about dealing on the federal level with law enforcement and how difficult it is in this region that he deals with. You're dealing from Atlanta all the way down through the smaller counties. And as you get to the smaller counties, the more rural counties, you're going to have a difficult time finding care, right? I guarantee you I can find care for most about anything in Atlanta. I can barely find any help in Macon for teen, child, adolescent mental health issues. And we're in Macon, and you can't find it. I remember I asked a buddy of mine, he's a psychiatrist here in Macon, he's a friend of mine, he used to go to church here with me, and I texted him one day and I said, hey doc, where do I go? Adolescent. He's like, I don't know. It's scarce out there. So it's tough, and that's in Macon. On average, 1 person in the U.S. dies by suicide every 11 minutes. In Georgia, 1,569 lives were lost to suicide, and 314,000 adults had thoughts of suicide in the last year. Now, I don't know how they get this data. I'm sure they have a very sophisticated way of doing that, but those are significant numbers. 1 in 4 people with a serious mental illness has been arrested by the police at some point in their lifetime, leading over 2 million jail bookings of people with with serious mental illness each year. Robert, I don't know, I mean, would you say that a lot of, I mean, you're different, sometimes you're dealing with a different level of criminal, person, a lot of mental health issues of the folks you guys are prosecuting, or is it?
There are certainly a lot of mental health issues that we send a lot of folks in to at least be evaluated, and the federal probation officers deal a lot with
Yeah.
mental health referrals and so forth. So yes, a fairly good percentage. Now, sometimes they mash that together with substance abuse.
Right.
Because some two are intermarried quite frequently.
Right, they're cousins. I say they're cousins. Mental health and addiction are usually cousins, and very closely. I don't know about you. I know you're trying to start a mental health court there in your county, and so obviously you're seeing the mental health issues in the system, and sometimes it's hard to bridge the two between mental health and do they belong in mental health court or drug court? It's
Again, Todd, I would say that we do run into, and our probation offices run into the very problem everyone was talking about earlier with smaller counties having almost no resources.
Yeah.
I mean, they're sending
Right.
folks miles away from their home for mental health treatment, and that's very difficult to do on an outpatient basis. So
and usually it's poor population. They got a gas to get them there, and all those things that go, and they can't get them there, and it just gets to be very difficult. So.
LSCMI, I said that right? Yeah. LSCMI screening, that gives you a better understanding on whether it needs to be mental health or drug.
Right. Okay.
In Veterans Court.
Right.
That has to be done by a facility.
Right. Yeah. So you got to have some screening methods to determine that. Very good. 7 in 10 youth, 70% of youth in the juvenile system have a mental health condition. 70%. That's an incredible number. And you said it earlier, our brains, well, I'm 57. I don't think my brain is fully developed yet either. So, but a child's brain, and then on top of that, you throw in all of the broken home factors that are going on there. And it's a disaster. It's a recipe for disaster for our youth, right? So, next slide, please. Georgians struggle to get the help they need. That's obvious. More than half of people with a mental health condition in the U.S. did not receive any treatment in the last year. Of the 391,000 adults in Georgia who did not receive needed mental health care, 45.4% did not because of cost. 13.4% of people in the state are uninsured. Georgians are more than 4 times likely to be forced out of a network for mental health care than for primary health care. Why is that, do you think?
because physicians aren't making the decisions.
Insurance companies a lot of times are making, and if you have a broken leg, yeah, I can see it. And I know when it's fixed. If I have a mental health condition, it's hard for me to see it. Because the brain can get sick, right? Your brain is part of your physical body, and your brain can get sick just like your arm can get broken, and but it's very difficult to measure that sometimes. And when are you fixed? You may never be truly fixed. I'm not, right? And there's so many factors that come into play with mental health. It's not like seeing a broken bone or helping somebody with COVID, right? It's not the same. We can give medication, and we can see improvement. A lot of times it's tough to measure that, and everybody's different. And so, yeah, there's a lot of variables in there when it comes to our mental health. So it's making it more difficult to find care and less affordable due to higher out-of-pocket costs. 4.9 million people in Georgia live in a community that does not have enough mental health professionals. How many people are in Georgia, population-wise? Anybody know? A little over 10 million. So we're talking almost half, right? We're at 5 million, right? So as I read this data, and I'm thinking to myself, what can we do? What can Jody, what can you do? Now, Jody has a counseling practice, so Jody's doing something, right? She's making herself available. Brad's making himself available for that. You know, I'll pick on Paul Shealy here. Paul says, yeah, you know, I'm just a grandfather, right? I'm not in this business. Well, you are kind of, you know, we're all in the mental health business because we have to deal with our own, right? So go to the next slide. Go to the next slide, Dylan. So here I put down some takeaways here, all right, that as I kind of read through and crunch the data, and I research and I read and I study, and I'm kind of technical, you know, it's kind of the Air Force in me. And so I said, what are the takeaways here? I said, number one, COVID did not cause our mental health crisis. It simply revealed it. Because the numbers have been increasing for a long time. I listened to a guy, he's a marketing guru called Seth Godin. Anybody ever listen to Seth Godin? Seth Godin is a bald-headed guy about this big around, and just got a brain. It's huge, right? And Seth, he makes statements like this. He says, you know, this is not the real issue is this, not this, right? He just makes here's the obvious. This is what you really need. This is what we're really looking at, and what we're really looking at is this. It's just revealing itself. Seth said that we have squeezed 2 years of change, he says we've squeezed 10 years of change into 2 years during COVID. Our society has changed. What we would have normally seen in about a 10-year period, we saw in 2. What do you think that does to people? It makes you uncomfortable, right? Yeah, it stresses you out, right? He's just stating the obvious. I just want to state the obvious here. Our young people are suffering mentally and emotionally. Number 3, resources seem scarce, or are they just hidden? There's all kinds of resources out there that I run across, and I didn't know that existed. I didn't know they were there. Somebody may come to, I didn't know Crossroads. Where are you guys located? I never heard of you, right? Have you had that happen before? Yeah. Many mental health challenges and solutions are in our control. What were the reasons for the mental health issues of our children? Isolation, lack of social time, lack of exercise, bad diet. Are those in our control? Now, if we don't get a hold on those, they will turn into something worse. And then the next thing you know, I go from a child with mental health issues to an adult who now is on medication, right? So go to the next slide. So I said there's 4 things, what I pulled from that, there's 4 things that I think that we can practically do to help our mental health. You're not a psychiatrist, you're not a psychologist, but can you help somebody discover their purpose? I listened to a guy, and I forget his name now. He's a top doctor psychiatrist in Europe. He's Indian. And he said, I can't tell you the number of people that came to me suffering with severe depression and wanted me to prescribe medication. He said, and I won't do that initially. He said, all I do is to help them to find their passion. He said, and when I help them to find their passion, I never hear from them again. He said, and I like that because they don't need me. He said, these are severely depressed people who want medication that never end up on medication because I simply help them to find their purpose and their passion in life. They now have something that brings them joy and happiness in their lives. I need people. I need a social life. I need fellowship. Isolation is terrible. I need physical activity, preferably outside. And I'm not saying you got to run a marathon. Go for a walk. Go for a bike ride. Go work in your yard. Do you know that the colors out here, the blues of the sky and the green of the grass and the purples and the yellows of the flowers have a chemical effect on your brain that stimulates all those chemicals in your brain that make you happy. That's why when it gets to be wintertime and it gets to be cloudy, what happens to our mood a lot of times? It goes in the tank because there's cloud, it's cloud cover, because those colors are gone. That's why in the springtime we're happier. Get outside. I don't need to be a psychiatrist to tell you to get outside. And the last I put down here, praise. Thank God for everything, even when you don't like it. What happens when the world would call this positive thinking, right? Think positive. Rick, think positive, think positive. Well, okay, we'll call it that. But God says, just be thankful about everything in your life, even if you don't like what's going on in your life. Thank you for what's happening. Yeah, I tell the guys a lot of times, I'm like, you know what, you got to learn to say this. I lost my job today. Thank the Lord. It means a better one's coming, right? My car broke down. Thank God. It means I got a better car coming, right? I got to find the positive in everything. And I don't have to be a medical professional to do those things, right? So when I talk about, what we're doing here on a community level, right, on a come together level, what can we do to encourage one another? So my goal for this, and I was talking to Janet earlier, and she had given me some real good pointers. She said, next time, let's do this. Next time, Todd, let's do, let's to make it better. And I said, I appreciate that, right? Because we're going to do this again in January. But in January, when we do it, it's going to be a little bit different format. And I want you to invite people. I want you to bring people back in here so we can build a better community, a bigger community of people who are interested in this. And then they can go out. And all we're doing is training each other and helping one another to be, we're not counselors. Jody's a counselor. But most of us in here are not counselors. But can we give counsel? Yeah. Can we encourage? I had a guy a while back, and he said his daughter was really struggling mentally. And he told me what was going on. He said, I'm not qualified to help her, Todd. And I looked at him and said, yeah, you are. I said, your daughter has chemicals in her body that are stimulated by certain things. And when those chemicals are stimulated, it helps her to overcome those emotional issues she's having right now. I said, have you told your daughter lately that you love her? Well, no, probably not like that. I said, have you told your daughter lately you were proud of her? Well, probably not. I said, have you told your daughter lately or just encourage her in whatever I said, you wouldn't believe the chemicals that are stimulated by those words. And you keep doing that, and you keep doing. I said, and yeah, I'm not saying you don't take her to a counselor. I'm not saying you don't take her to a counselor. I'm not saying she might not need some medication. I'm not saying that. I said, but there's something that you can do to help her without being that counselor. Something all of us can do as a community to help one another, because we're not going to overcome all these issues that we're seeing in our society right now by just saying, oh, well, they need to go see a doctor. Well, they're only going to go see most people can't afford that. Most people don't have access to that. And we're not going to fix that overnight. If 10 million people are in Atlanta or in Georgia, in Atlanta, if 5 million of them don't have access to mental health care, that's not something that's going to be fixed anytime soon. So we've got to do something. We got to do something ourselves. So next slide, please. So our next one, January 26th, is when we're going to do this again, and I'm working on the details of that right now. But I've got Jason Redmond coming in here on January 26th. He's going to speak, I think, at lunchtime to a certain group, and we're working the details out. And then that evening, he's coming back in that, and we're going to do a big thing that evening, and it's going to be combined with kind of a fundraiser event as well. And Jason is a retired Navy SEAL. He speaks at corporate events all over the country. And if you get a chance, Google Jason Redmond TED Talk. He's done some TED Talks. He's got a lot of stuff out there on YouTube. And Jason was shot up in Iraq several years ago, was told that he would never walk again. He was told that he would never live a normal life again. And he said, I'm not listening to that mess. And he really brings his message down to a practical level. He brings it down to our level to say, okay, now, I was dealing with my arms shot up, my legs are shot up, my face was shot off. I'm dealing with that. But how about Max? Max, what's Max dealing with? And how you can take that same mindset and apply it to your life. If it's a marriage or other relationship issues, whatever that is, how do we encourage ourselves around those things? So that's coming up in January, so I'm looking forward to that. So next slide, please. Awesome. All right, so next we're going to have Brad and Jody. So what questions might you have for me right now? Nothing?
I like what you said about people can actually help each other.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be a counselor. There's not a shot or a pill for everything.
No, there's not.
Sometimes you can help and you don't think you can help.
Yeah.
Give a praise instead of a put down. I love you instead of what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
That's just some good information to pass along that we actually forget. Just normal.
Yeah. Yep.
But to go along with what he said, even if there is a pill for something, you still have to have therapy too.
That's right. I shared this. I was sharing this earlier with Janet. In 2015, my youngest daughter went through and put us through. I hate to use that. It put us through, though. It put us through. We all went through together a very difficult time. She was 15 at the time, and she became all of a sudden just like a switch turned in her, went off in her life, and she became suicidal. She became homicidal. She was going to kill herself. She was going to kill me. She was going to kill her mother. It's one of those things. You're just like, what just happened here, right? And we were just trying to figure this. Our whole world turned upside down. And the first counselor we went to see, he said this to my wife and I. He said, if your daughter wasn't as well grounded as she is in the Word of God, I think she'd already be dead. And that was his first comment. We're thinking, oh my word, how can this happen? And he gave us a whole new perspective on this. He goes, oh no, that's what saved her life right now, we believe. Second thing is we knew immediately that we needed to get a diagnosis, and we did that. And I had to 1013 my daughter. You ever had to do that to somebody? It's a difficult decision. It's a very, very difficult decision. And when she came out of the behavioral hospital 5 days later, she came out with OCD, severe OCD, and very high anxiety, a number of things that today she still deals with. But she's matured and she's learned how to deal with them, and she's learned how to manage them. But the first thing they did was put her on medication. And I was like, if it's going to save her life, she needs it. But the next thing we did was get her into therapy, right? We had to get her into some hard, deep counseling with two different people. We had her with a great psychiatrist who was managing her medication, who was also a great counselor, and then we also had her over at Crossroads Counseling on Pierce, I think, over there, counseling over there. And then we had her at church here, and the youth pastor and his wife were working with her, and we had a number of different people pouring into, on top of her parents, right? We were pouring into her. But you know how it is with parents sometimes. You don't want to listen to your parents all the time. So we had a number of different people just pouring into her life. Now, my daughter today, is she still struggle with OCD issues? Yes. Does she still struggle with anxiety, here and there? Yes, but she's learned what those things are, and she's learned how to manage them, and she's not on any medication at all right now. She's not on anything. Now, I'm not saying that she may not come to a point where she needs to again. I'm not saying that. But right now, she's learned to, through the therapy and through those things, she's learned to do those things. So you're right, Mark, it's got to be coupled, because I don't want people who are just stuck on medication for the rest of their life. But they don't have to be. gets expensive, right? What other questions might you have? We'll take a break here in just a minute. Well, that's our plan. That's kind of our vision. That's our goal as we move forward. I'm hoping that in January we can do a little better job and get the word out a little better. But let's go ahead and I think we can move forward. Now, my problem is Judge Colvin is not going to be here until probably 4:30 or somewhere around in there. So let me do this. Let me. While I got a few minutes, I've got about 10 minutes here before we need to break again. All right. So let me switch gears for a minute. Suicide, when my daughter went through that, suicide became very near and dear to my heart. You go through something in your family like that. People ask me all the time, Todd, how did you get involved with Next Step and the addiction recovery ministry? What were you addicted to? I always tell them, well, I'm addicted to a lot of things. Aren't we all, right? I was never addicted to anything, though, that got me in a lot of trouble. I'm always addicted to illegal things, right? And so, not to say that we all can't have the opportunity to go down that road. And you'll hear Brad and Jody's testimony here in just a minute. So when something happens to you personally, though, it gets to be God puts that passion in your heart. And my sister was a severe cocaine addict, alcoholic, a number of different issues in her life that drove her down that road. In our childhood, a lot of it goes all the way back to our childhood, the relationship between our mom and dad and how we each dealt with that, right? So that passion was bred in me through my sister's recovery. Well, then in my daughter, when she went through everything she went through back in 2015, 2016, that bred an additional passion in my life called suicide and mental health issues. It's funny, that's what God will use the worst times in your life to bring things to light that you need to do. That's how he works. And we don't always like that, but he's going to use the worst things because we don't typically respond to good, we don't get motivated a lot of times when everything's good. It's when things are bad that God uses that to motivate us, right? So when my daughter went through that process, I kind of dove into suicide. And I read a whole bunch of stuff. And I read a book by a guy, I forget his name now, but I read a book by a guy and it fascinated me. And it says, the title of the book was, Why Do People Die by Suicide? And I said, I got to read this. And the guy had a dad, his father. This guy who wrote it is a psychiatrist, but he wrote it from the perspective of his dad who committed suicide. And then he's also writing it from the perspective of a psychiatrist. And he said, this is what I discovered about suicide. And again, this doesn't fit every scenario, but I thought it was a really good view of what somebody goes through. And David, you've been there. You've been down the road of, I made up my mind. I'm gonna end it, right? And Janet, I'm telling a story of a book that I picked up at the suicide when y'all did it here several years ago. And I forget the name of the doctor who spoke that day. Dr. Figueroa, that was it. Yep. And he's the one who mentioned this book, and I went and bought it. And the book lists, the guy, at the end of the day, you can read the whole book or you can get the Cliff Notes, right? I'll give you the Cliff Notes. Cliff Notes is this. Somebody needs 3 things in their life to commit suicide. 3 things, 3 primary. Again, this doesn't fit every scenario, but this was his observations, right? Number 1, a feeling of hopelessness. For whatever reason, that feeling of hopelessness. Number 2, I am a burden to everybody around me. Do you have those feelings, David? Hopelessness, and I'm a burden. And that's what he said. He said, when I have those 2 things in my life, he said in his research, he's found that when people have those 2 things in their life, they don't tend to go through with it. He said they have to have the 3rd thing, usually. And that 3rd thing is an ability to overcome the will to live, because you are designed for life. You will fight for life, right? We will fight for it. So something's got to enter into your world that gives you a sense that life is overcomable and I can end it. And for the longest time, he said that only occurred really a lot of times in people who saw combat or police officers or firefighters that were in that world where they saw death, they actually killed somebody, and all of a sudden there's something that switches in their brain that says, I can do this, right? Now you take this a step further to our modern society. Because your brain doesn't usually differentiate between reality and what it sees on TV, YouTube, video games. And with the advent of violent video games, where I am walking into some place as a teenager and I'm shooting everybody up, your brain doesn't really differentiate between reality and a world of video games. YouTube, I can find just about anything in the world on YouTube that's violent.
I just wanted to back you up on that statement, because when I played video games a lot when I was younger, I would remember driving around. I used to play Fortnite, and you would chop trees down and stuff. I would be driving around or walking around somewhere. I look at a tree, I would think about chopping it down. I'm like, what in the world?
Yeah.
So that really does make sense.
Yeah, because your brain does not differentiate between the two. So we live in a world where access to violence is increased, whether it's virtual or whether it's real.
Here's what
right?
I found.
Thank you. My watch talks to me. So those opportunities for that third piece to take place have increased over time with with virtual realities and all these different things. If you watch anything with Facebook and this whole meta, this virtual world that they're creating scares me to death. I'm not saying it can't be used for good. I'm not saying that at all. But from a mental health standpoint, it scares me to death. Because it's going to be more and more lifelike than it ever has been before. So anyway, we had a few minutes there. I thought I'd share that with you because it has always stuck with me. And I hope that can be a help to you, because you're going to deal with people. You're going to have people in your life in this world who are struggling with suicide. It's more and more prevalent every single day. So, any questions on that? Janet, go ahead.
Hey, can I just share something?
Yeah.
You know, one thing I really do appreciate this conference is when we talk about, I'm not in mental health, I'm not a mental health counselor, but we've got to take care of our own mental health.
Right.
And that's all of us,
Yeah.
right? So years ago, I came up with the 3 R's, and I hope this is helpful. But the 3 R's that I came up with are recognize, reject, and replace. You know, so
Recognize, reject, and replace.
yeah.
Yeah.
So first, we've got to recognize when that negative, just dark thought is there, or it's coming at us.
Yeah.
It crosses our mind. Then we've got to reject it, and then it's not enough to just reject it, like to throw it to the curb, but we've got to replace it.
Right.
And what I try to replace it with is God's word.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm in a battle mentally. I find a scripture, maybe write it on a note card, and every time that negative, dark thought comes, I want to replace it with the good, which is God's word, to kind of combat that. So to me, it's not enough to just recognize it and reject it. It's like if we don't replace it with the good, it's coming right back.
That's right. Something's going to fill that void.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I hope that.
No, it's excellent. Yeah, recognize, replace, recognize, reject, and replace. And I got to reject that negative thinking, right? and then I got to replace it with something good, because something's going to go in there. Your mind is never empty, right? Your mind is never, again, you're going to speak and communicate with you more than anybody else on a daily basis. Recognize, reject, and replace. That's good. Thank you, Janet. Very, very good. Mark?
Let's talk just for 1 second. Let's make a general comment about calling a 1013.
Yep.
When somebody says that they're going to harm themselves, whether it's somebody casual, somebody in your family, or a friend in another state, or how that works.
How did I do it?
No, not how you do it, but can you give us some protocol for?
Yeah, I can speak to you from, how we did it is that I set up an appointment. I set up an appointment with the doctor, and then took my daughter there. And I'm on. This is on video, and I'm going to post these videos so my daughters could see this, and my wife could see this. And let me tell you how difficult this was. Okay, we're talking about protocol. And my wife was here; she would back me up on this. Max was involved with this because I sought counsel from Max and from Chris Carmichael and from Kevin Mason, I think, and so several people on this issue, because this is your daughter, right? So I went home that day and I told my wife, I said, I'm making an appointment tomorrow for Mary. And my wife looked at me and she goes, she better come home. And I walked away because I couldn't guarantee that. I went, and I'm going to tear up. I went and I picked my daughter up, and I couldn't find her. And I heard the door slam, the front door. I said, okay, she's gone outside. So I went, and she's walking down the road, and her eyes are sunken in. They're black. And she's just a zombie. And I grabbed her, and I said, hey, baby, we got to go. Put her in the car. We went down there, and I told her, I said, I don't know what's going to happen here, baby, but we're going to get some help. And she looked at me and she goes, Dad, I'm not staying. And I said, yeah, your mom said the same thing, And they took her back. They asked me some questions. They asked her some questions, and then they took her back. She's 15 years old, so obviously she can answer questions without me, and that's what they wanted her to do, not answer questions with me. They want her by herself. The nurse comes back, 45 minutes later, and she pulls me in the room, and she says, we're going to have to admit your daughter. We're 1013ing her. So I called my wife, and whoa, did I hear it. She was so mad at me. So I called a friend of mine, Dr. George Crabb. Dr. George Crabb is a medical doctor down in Naples, Florida. And I didn't get an answer from him. He didn't pick up. I knew he was busy. It was the middle of the day. And I said, hey, Doc, I said, call me when you get a chance. I got a question for you. So by the time he called me back, it's about 6 o'clock that night. By that time, my wife has come up to the hospital. I'm there. My oldest daughter has come up. And my son has come up. And I was the bad guy. Everybody else was, this isn't the right decision. This isn't, I said, decision's out of our hands. They're mandating her. By law, she has to go. It was about that time, 6 o'clock that evening, we're still in the waiting room there, and they were like, take your time. They understood, take your time, it's okay. My George Crabb calls, and I pick up the phone, and I tell him what's happening, and I put him on speakerphone, and my wife's there, and my daughter's there, and Mary's there, and then we're like, and I told him what's happening. He goes, "You're making the exact right decision. The exact right. Do not waver." And I hung up, and I said, "Everybody hear that?" Everybody hear, and at that time, my wife said, "Okay," It was so emotional. I'll never forget, my wife was so upset. She was still at home, and she was coming up there to the hospital. At the time, it was Lake Bridge on Riverside. That's closed now. And so when she was so upset, when she went to get in the car, she busted her head. She came over there with a big black eye. She was so mad. It just made things worse, just par for the course. And it was just, but so protocol, that was my protocol. It was hard. And my daughter was so mad, the one who was going through it. She came home 5 days later, struggling. But we had a diagnosis. She's on medication. Medication, if you know anything about mental health medication, it takes forever for it to really kick in, right? And she comes home, and for the next year, it was a battle. It was like she's 16. She turned 16 during this time, and it was like having a 16-year-old who would turn back into a 6-year-old. Couldn't leave her home by herself. We didn't have a pair of scissors in the house. We didn't have a knife in the house. For 2 years, we didn't have a knife. We didn't have scissors. I had to change the locks on my shed because tools. I couldn't run a chainsaw. I couldn't run a power tool because it just set her off. We went through that for about a year. But we came out of that, we came out of that. But man, it's difficult. That whole 10-13, for us, that was a hard process. That was a difficult process. And my daughter said after she came back after the 5 days and we came home, she looked at me and she goes, "Dad," she goes, "that was the best move you made." Because all of a sudden she felt like she was going to get some answers. She was going to get some answers. And then we ended up with a great child psychiatrist, just wonderful. And then halfway through, she got sick and had to retire. I don't know, something happened really. So we were stuck with nobody for a while. It was really tough, but we worked through it, we did. But I don't know if that answers your question, but I can just speak to our protocol and what it was like. And I've asked my daughter so many times if she would put this on video, and she's, "Dad, I don't want to, not yet, not yet." She don't mind if I talk about it, but she's just not ready to do it yet, and I understand that. So, man, I've gone way over. Let's take 10 minutes. So,
all right. So next up, I've got Brad and Jody Sapp, and I've met Brad. It's been a long time now, Brad, that we first went to lunch. We're down here at Texas, whatever they call it now, Border Grill or whatever it was. It's been a long time, and really, Brad and Jody, both of them together, have started Crossroads, and watched that grow and move, and everything that's happening there, and then your counseling ministry as well. So I've referred several people over to you. I don't know if they've come to you, but I have referred several of our ladies here who were struggling with things here and were coming to me, and I'm like, you're probably better off with a lady, so I've recommended toward you. So, but I'm going to turn this over to Brad, and they're going to share their story. I was trying to give them an idea of what I was looking for, and I said, I want you to talk about loving your husband through addiction. And then Debbie, my assistant, she came back and said, "You might want to broaden that a little bit. Make it loving your family member. Don't narrow it too much." Right. So, but I'm going to turn this over to you, Brad, and I'm going to get out of your way.
Sounds good. Thank you, Todd. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here, to tell our story. I was one of the things I was thinking earlier when it got brought up as to, there's no pill that will cure addiction. And I started laughing, and Jody looked at me, because the way my brain works is if there was a pill to cure addiction and you said you take this one pill, it will cure it, I'd want to know how two would make me feel. And that's exactly why we're here, is to talk about how to love a family member through addiction. And I mean, the guys in here in Next Step, y'all are probably going to hear me say some stuff, and hopefully you'll be like, man, you'll kind of draw back, because your family members need to hear it. And y'all know that. And you'll either think, man, I wish he'd hush, or, yeah, I'm glad he's saying what he's saying. And this is more of, I'm under no illusion that you would rather hear me speak. I promise you would rather hear her speak. So I'm going to let her get started. We just are thankful for the opportunity, and glad for Todd and Mikado and Next Step and everything that's going on, and we're grateful to be here.
Yes, thank you. I feel like we have the worst slot because it's like the middle of the afternoon. Everybody's tired and they've already listened to some people, but we're going to try to keep you engaged. So when we got the topic, how to love a family member through addiction, my immediate thought was, most of the time, or at least in my experience, it's through tough love. You got to make some hard decisions, do some things that don't feel good in the moment, hopefully for that greater outcome. As Todd was saying, now we work in addiction recovery. We work with men every day and their families that have experienced addiction. But there was a time in our lives when we were the ones that had the problem. We were facing it, and we needed some help.
Let me stop right there right quick and say that because the fact that we're here, I don't want you guys to miss this. The word says, and we know that in all things God works together for good to those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. And Bradley mentioned earlier, 10 years ago, if something would have happened or somebody would have said something about sitting here, well, if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be sitting here talking in this setting, still married, my life put back together, I would have had a hard time believing that. But also notice that I said 10 years. I didn't say 10 days. I didn't say 10 weeks or 10 months. It's years. And so what we led out with is trust the process, right? Trust the process. Trust that we serve a good God. And to be thankful for whatever you have, regardless of what things look like. When Todd said, man, when my car breaks down, we worry about, like today, I try to learn, and it helps me to have guys that I have to remind, be thankful that you got a car today to break down. Because I remember that no matter how tough things get, how hard life gets, there was a time when all I have is all I wanted. When I had nothing. And you would have said, man, just give it back to me. And then once God starts blessing us back, then we start looking at the problems. So remember that. Trust that process, and hopefully you will see some hope sitting up here today in our story and in letting God be enough in your life. So
he just got right to the meat. He went out of order, but that's okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit, as we're kind of talking about that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of our background so you just know a little of our story and a little about us. So we grew up in the same small town. So we were actually high school sweethearts, got married after college. There was some loss sprinkled in, and Brad's dad was involved in a really tragic accident in the year 2000, and so he lost his dad. Shortly after that, we got married, and then he tore his ACL. And so I always say that was sort of a perfect storm for his addiction, because he had this heart issue, right? This grieving heart, all this unresolved grief of why his dad was taken, why he was taken that way, those kinds of things. And then he had legitimate physical pain. He had surgery, he went to therapy, of course was prescribed pain medication, and it didn't take him long to realize that pain medication did a lot more than just numb his physical pain. It also numbed him out emotionally. And so for him, that kind of began a 12-year battle with addiction. So he was using, but I was also very unhealthy because I say that I was always just covering up to keep up. Nobody could find out about this. Oh my God, what would they think? What would they think about him? What would they think about me? I was angry with God. Like, God, what I've done things right for the most part. Like, what is happening? And God showed me so much through that. But for so long, I did that. And I always say it was kind of like the guys in the circus. They're like spinning the plates in the air. but you can only keep those going for so long before they come crashing down. And that was kind of us. And so the journey looked like Brad was in and out of rehabs, in and out of programs, detoxes here, programs there, all that kind of stuff, did some counseling. But he's kind of your like model resident. I mean, he could, make it look like he was there doing the right things.
I've always said I could be a program MVP.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
when I'm in it, I could convince people that I had what they wanted, I was doing what they wanted me to do, but it was always exterior. I grew up playing sports, performing on a field and stuff. Well, when I got in a program, I would just perform just like I would on the ball field. But there was no change on the inside. For me, like Jody said, I was just about every 2 years. For a 12 to 13 year period, every couple of years, I was in and out of detox, a treatment center or something, off and on. And
he would tend to do real well while he was in the walls of the program, as you would, because there's not really an opportunity to do anything different. But then it would be when he would come home and, life would kind of go back to normal and he would start to struggle. And at one point we did what I thought was long term. It was 6 weeks. That felt so long term, but now I know that's not long enough. But he did that for 6 weeks, and I can remember when he came home thinking, oh God, this is it. Like, we're cured.
He's cured.
He got like baptized again and everything. And I was like, okay, we're going to make it. Well, like the others, it didn't last very long. And for him, so that was just kind of our journey for about 12 years. And I can remember somebody saying to me at some point, it was probably, I would say year 10 or 11, they were like, you don't have to keep covering up for him. Like, you don't have to keep, somebody would see, I'd be at church and they'd be like, where's Brad? And, oh, he had to work, or he's out of town. No, he just couldn't get his stuff together because he'd been taking pills.
Yeah, instead of saying he's hungover or won't get out of the bed, it was coming up with some kind of excuse so that, because the reflection was that it made her look bad.
That's right. It was my pride, right, that was at stake. Because I was not making him do those things. I certainly had a role in some of the things he was doing, but it was his choice to do that. And so once somebody said that to me and I kind of started walking that avenue, there was so much freedom in that for me. Because the truth of it is, like, whether I said the truth or not, it was still my reality. He was still addicted. He was still using, and that is what was happening. So for us, it finally all came tumbling down in like February of 2013. He was a very functional addict. And you've probably heard people say those are sometimes the worst kind because there's, they are so functional for so long. And so there's often takes them longer to get to that tipping point where they can't function anymore, but they always do. And so that was his case. Thankfully, we were in counseling. I cannot recommend that enough. I totally agree. And not just because I'm a therapist, but because everybody needs it. Everybody's got something. And so our counselor at the time recommended a program that was 10 months. And he said, I think it's residential, it's out of town, I think that's what he needs to do. And so he left, and that was really, I say all the time, that program, God did all the work, but that program was the vessel that God used to save our family. Because when Brad was gone, he had a lot of work to do. God talked to him, worked on his heart, but he also worked on mine. In the beginning, I was real angry. It's such a roller coaster of emotions when you're dealing with an addict, and I was angry, and I was done. Like, when I dropped him off, he'll probably share that when he speaks in a minute, but when I dropped him off, I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore, but if you want to have a relationship with our kids, you'll figure it out. You'll stay here and get some help and get healthy. And so he did, and he came home that December, and it was just, everything was absolutely different. He was a new man. For sure. And I had been praying. I want to say something about prayers, because I tended to always pray very timid prayers. I was like, God, just get him sober. And now I love to say that God was looking down going, is that all you want? Because I can do so much more with his life. And he has so much more than just get him sober. And so I started, when I dropped him off in February of that year, it was like 0 contact. They had said for like 30 or 60 days. It ended up being like 107 for us, which was fine because I was plenty mad. And I think he was, doing his own stuff. But it was a long time. And I always say we each needed every one of those days Well, when I finally got to the point of, because at first I really didn't even know if I would go. It seemed like same song, 14th verse. I didn't even know if I would go once he got visits. But then I think curiosity got the best of me, and I wanted to see what was happening. And I had all of my prayer warriors praying. I want to know. I am praying boldly that God will show me in that first moment when I lay my eyes on him that he's doing a work. He's doing something and he's calling me to stay. And so they were all praying that with me. The call finally came. I went that Saturday, and I'll never forget, parking and not really knowing where to go and kind of walking. And then he got up and started coming towards me, and he had tears streaming down his face. And God answered that prayer so big in that moment. I knew instantly that God was doing a work and that he was calling me to stay in my marriage. And more than that, God always does immeasurably more. And so he also said to me, or let me know, that he had something else planned for us. I had no idea what it was, but something else. Now I know it was Crossroads, but I have something else planned, and it's going to take both of you. And so he came home in December of 2013. Shortly after that, he knew he was being called to open a program like the one he attended, and so we started Crossroads in 2015. And I thought that was probably all enough. And then God called me to counseling. And so I went back to school, got my master's, and started my practice in 2020. And so I get to work with the men in our program and their families, as well as just people in the community.
Yeah, and that's exactly what she's saying. That and I'll tell you, loving an addict and looking back and thinking, the choices that Jody made while I was using for so long and in and out of treatment centers and stuff, she led into with tough love, right? That tough love is one of the most effective ways and things that you can do in loving an addict. She finally loved me enough to say, I'm done. I'm through. And she meant it. And part of me, especially the guys in here will understand this, because part of me, when we put people through what we put them through, at some point when they look back at you and say, I'm done, part of you is like, good for you. Good for you for not letting me keep doing this to you. And so I went to No Longer Bound, was the name of the program that I went to for a year, almost a year total. And when she put me out up there, it was, like she said, 60 to 90 days of no contact. Well, I'm going to hit on the trust the process thing again, right? If I signed up to go there, then I signed up to take the test, which means God's going to test me. Am I going to trust the process of the program that I'm in and the place that I'm at, or am I going to go back to my own will and start thinking that I know how to tell help how to help me? But I said 60 to 90 days, I can do this song and dance. I'm a program MVP. I can perform. I'll make them think I'm the best one here. I'm going to get my visits back in half the time. I'm going to show them I'm be the quickest one to ever get them back. Well, that program was different. It didn't matter how much I performed. They put me in a position where it was 107 days before I ever saw her. And when she put me out, she said, I'm done. We're through. But if you ever want to see your kids again, you'll stay in this program. They were 4 and 7 at the time. I had a son that was 7 and a daughter that was 4. I knew that she meant it, and I knew she was showing me tough love. And so I stayed because I was so full of pride and ego that I wouldn't even admit how much I loved her. Ain't no big deal. I was so full of it. But I knew after losing my dad when I was 21 years old, my dad owned a heating and air company, was putting in an air conditioning system, glue caught on fire, and he was burned. He went from taking me to church every Sunday, in the Word, all of that stuff, to being burned and dying in the Augusta Burn Center in a matter of a few days. And I was a hard-hearted, angry kid that did not know how to look at anybody and say, I'm sad, I'm hurting, I need help. What I did know to do was drink and take pain pills that numbed that pain. It made me think I didn't care. I still cared just as much, even more. But it numbed it out. So when I got to No Longer Bound, I knew that Jody meant she was done. But I did not want to lose my kids. My kids were the avenue that God used to get my prideful tail into a program that would finally let somebody help me if I would trust the process and go through what he had in store for me. And I did. And at day 107, she showed up. She looked at me. She saw a change in me. She could tell that this wasn't just Brad performing. This was me surrendering. That was me finally being broken. And until I was able and willing to be broken, God could never put me back together the way that only He could put me back together. And when I finally surrendered, that's what happened. And that's why we're sitting here. Was it always beautiful and wonderful after that and stuff? No. It's still been tough. But she has still shown tough love, and that is the thing that we want people to hear. That is one of the most important things. The other thing is, when I say I knew she meant it, she drew that line in the sand, and she wasn't going to come back on it. The other thing is, let your no be no and your yes be yes. So from the loved one of a family member and stuff, when you say something, stick to it. Don't say, well, if you do such and such, I'm going to do this, and then the loved one doesn't live up to their end of the bargain, but yet we kind of back off on our consequences a little bit. I knew she wasn't backing off on those consequences. And so that was part of also what forced me to get my stuff together and to say, okay, I'm willing to surrender. I'm willing to look at, and one of the ways that Crossroads does what we do and No Longer Bound did what we did, and the things that we look at is why I finally surrendered to the position of saying, why am I doing what I'm doing? Not what am I doing, but why. Why do I keep treating the people that I love the most the worst? Why do I say I love my kids, but I don't show it in my actions?
So what's the heart issue or the trauma
Yes.
that's been buried down that you're numbing? Because if you're continuing to use substances or anything to numb yourself, then there's something that's been buried down that you've not dealt with yet.
You have an emotional hurt or pain that you're trying to deal with, a substance or something or someone or anything. And to finally turn around and look at that is one of the ways that God used to change me. And the other thing is, so tough love, let your no be no and your yes be yes. If you draw a line in the sand and they cross it, that's it. The other thing is, be real particular about who you surround yourself with. Have people in your life that really know you. And I think that is one of the reasons that we're sitting here as well, is because when Jody put me out, I can remember entrusting that process of 107 days. I would be pumping gas into the van of the recovery center I was at and wondering if my mortgage is being paid, if she came back and listened to other people in her life and put all of my stuff in a pile and set it on fire. I didn't know, but I stayed. Because I knew for so long I had gotten out, I had manipulated the situation, and I had tried to make things work out my way. And I was finally done and said, God, if this works out, it's going to be because you do it, not me. Because I've done it over and over to get it back. And I think that one of the key things for Jody was having people in her life who not only knew what was going on, they knew everything. Not kind of what we tell them and pick and choose, but truly knew her and was praying for her and offering wise, godly counsel.
They spoke truth to me.
Yes.
You've got to have people in your life that are going to speak truth to you. Because if you've ever dealt with an addict, and I know you men that have experienced this know this, addicts are master manipulators. And so you get in a conversation with them, and about halfway through, they got you feeling like you're the crazy one. Like what in the world? And so if you have somebody that you're talking to, then they can say, whoa, Jody, that's not right. That's not how it's supposed to be.
What?
Yeah, so that's super important. Because, it's just, I tell people in my office all the time, it's just kind of part of the disease. That's just what they do. They talk their way out of it and turn it around. That's the goal, right? And turn it around and get you to look at yourself. But the cool thing about our story, I think, is that God was teaching us the same lesson, even though we were on very different sides of the storm. So there was Brad, who had kind of been plucked out of our home, sent away to this program, like he said, had no idea what was happening, if I was staying, if he still had a home, any of that. And God said to him, what if she leaves? What if she leaves and takes your kids and, you don't see them again? What are you going to do then? Are you going to go back to using and get the same results you've been getting? Or are you going to surrender and let me be enough in your life? And so then here I am back home. My life's not going the way I planned at all. And, you know, my husband's suddenly gone missing, and I got to figure out what I'm telling everybody, right, about where he is. And thankfully, by that point, I was transparent. I was able to share where he was. But, you know, life was not going the way I planned. And suddenly I was there, a single mom by myself, raising this 4-year-old and 7-year-old, working a full-time job. I mean, there was just a lot going on. And so God looked at me and said, what about you? What are you going to do? Are you going to get angry and resentful and bitter? Or are you going to surrender and let me be enough in your life? You know, because he can be enough. So that was never in our own strength that we did that. But thankfully, we both surrendered, and God was able to do what only he can do because of that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's one of the key things to our story is the work that I did and the work that she did. Because I see relationships and stuff all the time with men that I deal with now, and I see the guy getting healthy, but the family members aren't. And oftentimes I love the analogy that it's like a car with 4 flat tires and we're only fixing 1 flat tire. The rest of them are still flat. They're not getting any help. They're not looking at the role that they played in it. And I never thought I would hear her say a role that she played, like it was always my fault. You know, and 99% of it was, and I own that. But in order for us to be here today, I think a huge part of that is a testament to the work that she did, because if you go back and look at, we did journal there, and I hated journaling when I got there too. That was a big part of what we did. And if you go back and look at our journals now, God is telling us the same thing. He was telling me, you can let me be enough, because I doubted if he ever could. You know, I said, y'all don't know me. I always have to have something.
Yeah, and talking about like the family members having work to do as well, it's because you've heard it said that addiction is a family disease, and that's so true. It affects the person that's using and the people that love them, the people that are in their vicinity. And so it's so important that they're also finding some healing. It's real easy to look at them and go, oh, well, he's got the real big problem, right? I mean, like he's the one that's got the problem, like I'm fine. But gosh, just because I wasn't using drugs certainly didn't mean that I was fine.
Yeah, and I say all the time too, even if she didn't have a problem living with me for that long, she had a problem.
That would have given somebody a
Mother
problem.
Teresa would have been crazy if living with me. I mean, like she said, you could turn around and manipulate and make them feel like it's their fault, and you turn things around and stuff. So all of that finally came to a head when I did find freedom in 2013. And I think, you know, also, the other piece of advice that I can give for loved ones who have a family member or a friend or whoever who is an addict, when you're dealing with them, you know, obviously tough love, make sure that you stick to whatever you say, and have a plan. Like do your research. You know, Todd hit on a lot. Stuff like this is very important for that, because it shows you what resources are available. Because one of the most difficult things is when somebody knows that their loved one needs help or is an addict or struggling with substance issues, but they don't have a plan of how to move forward. And I always try to lay that out for people. And it's like, well, if you can't just approach them and say, well, you need help. Okay. I mean, I'd be like, yeah, I know. But now what? So go ahead and have a plan, do your research, have people in your life who know exactly what's going on and you're telling the truth, and they know you and you know them. The same thing with, you know, for instance, a drug test. I mean, how many people give loved ones drug tests and stuff, but they don't have a plan for if they fail it or pass? You know, it's like, go ahead and have a plan. If you're going to hand them a drug test, what are the results? What's going to happen based on the results of this test? And then stick to it and have everything lined out as far as that goes. So when you're, you know, and just communicate is the biggest thing. Don't keep things hidden, because the longer that you keep it hidden, the more that it grows. And we don't want to turn and face our loved one who we know probably has a problem. Well, the truth is that problem is probably way bigger than you realize. Because by the time somebody looked at me and said, you've got an issue, whether it was drinking or drugs or whatever, the issue was enormous, because you probably would not have known until it got way out of control. And that's what sin does to us, right? You know, I love to say that sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to be there, and cost you more than you ever intended to give it. And that is exactly what happened to me. And so the way to love a loved one through some of that stuff is to take the stuff that we just said into consideration. Tough love, yet you say yes, mean it, say no and mean it. Have people in your life that know you and be willing to stick to it. Don't compromise. One of the things that I preach so much on at Crossroads is non-negotiables. I have non-negotiables in my life that I stick to. And somebody can come along and say, hey, well, why do you do this or that? And one of the reasons is I know what compromising on some of those non-negotiables has gotten me in the past. And I'm not willing to pay what I used to pay to compromise them. Anything else?
I mean, I think, like what he said, like talking about tough love and like doing the things that are hard. For a long time, he didn't have anybody in his life that was doing that. I wasn't willing to do it for a long time. But then sometimes, his mom or his brother, they certainly weren't. Because for them, I mean, really small town, I mean, my goodness, we're not going to have anybody knowing what he's doing, or that's his trouble. And it's kind of funny because something came up at one point about No Longer Bound and his time there. And she said, oh, we've just swept that right under the rug. And he was like, no, we're not going to do that because that's who made me. That's what made me who I am today. And so, I mean, you have to own those parts of your story because God's got a purpose for all of it. There's always purpose in the pain. He doesn't, you don't go through something hard for it to be fruitless. I mean, there's so much that we've been able to do and like opportunities he's given us that if it were not for this addiction and this story and this thing we face, we would not have had. So,
yeah. I mean, look at this. The fact that we're sitting up here telling this story and talking as a result of those times and looking back when I was hopeless. I didn't think it would ever change for me. I didn't think I could ever be free from it. That it was something that I would struggle with for the rest of my life until it killed me. But that's all a lie from the enemy. What does the Word tell us? Who the Son sets free is free indeed. To find freedom in Christ, not to rehab, to go back to who I used to be, because that's why I started using. Who I was when I started using is why I started using. Today, to be regenerated, a new creature in Christ, to look at what made me do the things that I was doing, what was inside of me that I needed to deal with, so that now the fruit that I bear is way different than the fruit that I used to. If you plant an apple tree, you're going to get apples. Today, I actually learned how to plant something that's worth reaping. I heard my whole life, well, you reap what you sow, you reap what you sow. I didn't know how to plant anything worth reaping. And today, that's what I'm learning. And that's what I'm, encouraging each one of you to do. And the other thing is, in loving an addict is you got to have thick skin. Tough love means you got to be tough too, right? Because if you come at me with one thing that I did wrong, I was coming back at you with about 5 or 10 things that you're doing wrong. And that kept people away from me. So the more timid somebody was in approaching me with that I had a problem or I needed to get help, if they were real timid with it, they didn't stand a chance. Today, you got to go, if you have a loved one that you need to speak truth to, you got to be willing to speak that truth and have thick skin. Because the truth is the truth, right? And when we stand on that, nothing anyone says back at us really matters because we know the truth. So, again, tough love, say what you mean and mean what you say and stick to it. Have a plan. This is all part of, hopefully, that plan. Yeah. So we can network, so as Be Well grows and we're doing what we're doing here, you can come up with all of the resources available. Because we are not the end-all, be-all. There is no end-all, be-all. There is no checklist that I can tell you, do this, 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 and this, and you will be good. It doesn't work that way. That's why you hear us say, trust the process, because it is a process.
And I think, in that process also seeking wise counsel is so important. Whether it's mentors, people, those friends that are going to speak truth to you, a pastor, certainly a counselor. I'm so thankful for mine. We did some really good work together while he was away doing work, so I'm really thankful for that. So for sure, using those people that God has placed around you as resources. and I also wrote a book. I didn't bring it today, but it's on Amazon. It's called Life in Pieces, and it actually is like a compilation of my journal entries. So I've always been a journaler, and I started journaling when I dropped him off in February, and journaled that whole year. And a lot of it was just kind of, I couldn't talk to him every day like normal, so it was just kind of stuff that our kids were doing or what was happening in life and their activities. But then a lot of it was, what God was teaching me and showing me in conversations. And so I just kind of did it. But I knew that, like, I was going to use that. I would often joke, like, I'm going to publish these one day because I think it can be helpful for somebody that finds themselves in those same shoes, just to know that, like, you're not crazy. It's just a roller coaster of emotions, to experience that raw emotion. And so it's not going to be a New York bestseller, but it is just it's an act of obedience on my part. I knew God was telling me to do that. So I did that, and we published it last year, and it's been a good thing. And what's crazy is I don't consider myself a writer either, but I think I got at least one more book in me, so we'll see.
Yep, definitely. And I mean, again, just to be super encouraging to you guys to keep up the work, the guys that are in Next Step now, everybody that's here that has shared stuff, it's been great. I hope that you have learned something and you have seen maybe some steps that you can take to help a loved one who may be an addict or may have some mental health issues or from the legal system down. But at the end of the day, it's not about what I do or what Jody does or what we do here. It's about what God does in us and through us. And I think that is one of the most important things that I learned, is how to get my love, acceptance, worth, and security from God, not from anything this world had to offer, because the world will fail you and people are going to upset you and things are going to happen. Because in closing, like Jody said, when I was at No Longer Bound, and you can look at both of our journals and God telling us that He could be enough, as long as my recovery was based on anything other than letting God be enough, it was never going to last, I don't believe. Because it was always about getting her back, getting the job back, getting some money in my account, whatever that may be, and it was never enough. So when I finally surrendered and said, you know what, Lord, if none of that stuff ever comes back, if I never make another dime and she doesn't come back, and He said, what if she takes those kids? Hold on now. And I said, okay. Because people are going to die. It's guaranteed. Ain't much is it in this world, but that's one of them. My dad died, and it hurt me like crazy. And I was a sensitive, kind-hearted kid that did not want anybody to see me hurt. And as life goes on, people are going to die. But if I allow God into my life to let Him be enough, I surround myself with people, then there's nothing that we can't get through. And I hope you find encouragement in that and in our story, because it is pretty amazing. And I'm glad I gave you all that material to write that book.
Yeah, it was he was the main character. He was the main character for sure. But yeah, it's just, I think our story is just a story of God's redemptive power and His redemption and what He can do. So thanks for having us.
It is. Thank y'all.
Stay up here. My own still. All right, stay up here for 1 second. I do. If you get a chance to speak to them afterwards, please do so. They're just genuine, and I appreciate so much their transparency, their honesty, and now that you're on the flip side of things in a way. Brad and I had a conversation here right before lunch. Just dealing with issues in a program is tough sometimes.
We could do another talk on that.
Yeah, we could do that's a whole other topic. It's
Yeah.
a whole other topic.
Yeah, I will say right quick that the craziness of that is I also mentioned this morning that, in going into what I went into and being a guy that was always going to be good at whatever I did, I'm not going to struggle at anything. If I do something, I'm going to be good at it. And God called me to something that inside the enemy will try to tell me that I'm never good at it.
Well,
Statistically, I never will be. I don't believe when it comes to addicts and men in recovery and all of that stuff. But that is because it continues to not only humble me, but to push me towards Him. Because I'm not doing it. He's doing it.
Benny?
What's up, brother? Yeah.
you was in the program and more or less you was faking it to make it.
Mm-hmm.
If you could go back now and talk to yourself, what would you say?
Quit.
So more or less like the people that are faking it now, what would you go back now that you're older and you're living on what you were supposed to live? What would you tell yourself to wake up?
I would tell myself to, number one, swallow your pride and ask myself genuinely, why are you doing the things that you're doing? You're so worried about what everybody else thinks about you, but in reality, the people that I was worried about what they thought about me, I didn't want anything they had. So stop acting the way you're acting and just surrender and let somebody really know you. Because hardly anybody really knew me. And I would say, quit letting your pride get in the way and surrender. What do you really want?
Thank you. Amen.
Right.
Good.
Thank y'all.
Awesome. What I'm going to do, because Justice Colvin has pleasantly, to my surprise, I'm glad she's here early. Now, let me tell you, she's been gracious to us because she has another event tonight, a pretty big event, and she's also made time to come here for us folks, right? And so I want to take 5 minutes, hit the bathroom. That way I can get Eric a chance to shift gears. And then I am going to get Justice Colvin up here, and you don't want to miss her. I promise you. No. So let's take 5 minutes, please. 5 minutes, right? I'm just being personal about this, okay? I met Justice Colvin several years ago when she was running mental health court here in Macon-Bibb. And it's the only judge courtroom I was in that I ever saw her bring the courtroom to tears. I'll never forget the day that I was in there with Kimberly Taunton. I don't know if you remember Kimberly. And I just remember how the issue that was there and just how firm you were with her, but you were gentle with her at the same time and very deliberate, but also very compassionate. And I appreciate that. And I've never been in a courtroom where I've experienced that. And then sitting in mental health court with you a few times, that was an experience. I remember one time there was a young lady who went up before you, and I think she tried to accuse you of trying to steal her husband. And
may have. I don't. And you can't make it up.
And I never forget, you said I just got married. So, it was comical. It was comical. And but she has just been and personally too, because you've had a personal story, I believe, with your own family, mental health issues. I think you shared with your father. It was your dad. Okay, I'm sorry. I won't say anything. So anyway, I will not belabor this. She has taken her time she has another big event tonight that she's going to speak at, so I won't keep her or keep this too long because she needs to get up here. But anyway, she is now gone from Bibb County Superior Court to the Georgia Court of Appeals, I believe, and now to the Georgia Supreme Court as an associate justice. How long have you been there now? Okay. And you enjoying that? Is it good?
It is very different.
Yeah,
different.
I'm sure it is. So much different than Macon-Bibb Superior Court and mental health court.
I will always miss Macon-Bibb Superior Court.
Yeah. Much more personal probably as well. So please give her a round of applause.
Yes, Yvonne said shh.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is kind of different. I'm so used to sitting in a formal setting, so I'm going to try to do this sitting down. So thank you all for having me here. It is not the bruises on the body that hurt. It's the wounds of the heart and the scars of the mind. I'm going to read that again. It is not the bruises on the body that hurt. It's the wounds of the heart and the scars of the mind. She was somewhere between 8 to 10 years old when she noticed she just couldn't get it right. Her parents were divorced, so she saw her dad every other weekend. He was religious about that. He was good about that, but he always expected her to know where everything was in his house, a house she didn't live in every day. If she couldn't find something in the kitchen soon enough, she knew it was coming. He'd get very upset, Mad, in fact. There was that time where she and her cousin were with him in the van, and they were so hungry because they hadn't eaten all day. Dad forgot they needed to eat. He didn't seem hungry at all. As she got older, she knew something wasn't right, but she thought it was her. Maybe she wasn't smart enough, wasn't pretty enough, or didn't understand her dad as well as she should have. She coped by always doing her best, trying to be a good student. Hopefully it would make him proud, and he would say and do things that she needed to hear and feel to know that she was special and she was valued. As she got older, their relationship was on and off again because she came to expect certain things from her dad: a listening ear, respect, unconditional love. She didn't know he was capable of displaying such in a consistent way that felt really real, but she knew he loved her. She didn't realize that he never accepted a diagnosis of bipolar. She found out at the age of 24 when he was admitted to a facility because he was a danger to himself. That's how she found out. That's how she learned that he never accepted the diagnosis and only took meds under the threat of imprisonment. He never accepted the diagnosis, and ultimately he cycled in and out of normalcy, and ultimately his body couldn't sustain life, and he died. He never accepted his diagnosis. He didn't accept that he was not his illness. He never accepted the fact that his mental health didn't define who he was. He never did, and as a result, he didn't see all that she became, all that she did. He didn't see his grandkids become adults, graduate from college. He never knew his granddaughter, who he treated like a princess, something his own daughter wanted to experience. He never saw his granddaughter grow up to become the beautiful young lady that she is. He never realized that his mental health was simply something he experienced. But those mental health issues were not him. They didn't define him. He simply failed to practice acceptance, treatment, and wellness. 90% of adults in the United States say we are experiencing a mental health crisis in our country. And in fact, we are. Just last month, in September, it was reported that in the 6 weeks since the launch of the National Mental Health Hotline, the 988 hotline, close to 10,000 Georgians have called seeking support. 10,000 people have sought help for their mental health problems in just 6 weeks in Georgia alone. Many of you here today are making this type of support possible because I know we have some providers here. Whether you're a family member, a social worker, a service provider, a friend, or someone who experiences mental health challenges, you are supporting others. I know that because you are here today, even though it's near the 5 o'clock hour. Kerry Washington, and I tried to pick someone who people know, she was on Scandal, but she said it best. It's really important to take the stigma away from mental health. Both our brain and our heart are really important. Why wouldn't anyone seek help to have those things as healthy as our own teeth? Think about it. We're really sick in a society because we don't think about it in that way. You go to the dentist. You go for your yearly checkup. Why wouldn't you go for checkups on mental health issues when they're bothering you? But that's the lie we tell ourselves. There is no life that is free of pain. It's the very wrestling of our problems and with our problems that can be the impetus for our growth. But we know growth can only come when we take care of our mind as well as our body. No one is alone. We are all in this together. We need each other. No matter who we are, we're all in a quest to live a full and healthy life. Mental health conditions are increasing worldwide. According to the World Health Organization, there has been a 13% rise in mental health conditions in just the last decade. Even more disturbing is that 20% of the world's children and adolescents have a mental health condition. 20%. These conditions in children account for many deaths by suicide, which is the second leading cause of death among young people from the age of 15 to 29. Second leading cause of death from 15 to 29. And I'm going to put a pin in my notes and tell you that viral video that went viral of me talking to kids, I still do that on occasion when the judge assigned, now that I'm no longer there, has a conflict. And just last week, I talked to a little girl, 10 years old, who's had her first attempt at suicide. She was molested 3 times at the age of 4, 8, and now she's 10. Situation was divorce, but the person has come back around. It's real. Our children are struggling, and some of it because of mental health issues, and sometimes trauma brings on mental health issues. But I'm going to stay connected with her because I think she needs somebody pouring into her. In fact, suicides went down for adults, but as a result of COVID, the suicide rate for adolescents has increased. We need to start having real, honest conversations about the crisis that we face, and we need to start having those conversations now. I submit and I believe we miss something with the most important, precious ones around us, young adults and young children. And gentlemen, that's the reason why you're in this program, because our future matters, and they're looking to you. And what you do, what we don't realize many times, determines what they will do. Kids can't be what they don't see. And whatever they see, they will be. So we can't get this thing called life right unless we have children and we have them growing up to be healthy and whole adults. And they can't do that if they don't see that we're accepting our diagnosis and we're accepting treatment. They must know that they're valuable just as they are. Clubhouse International reported that mental illness is more prevalent than cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. I'm going to read that again because most people don't realize that. Mental illness is more prevalent than cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. In fact, they report that despite this growing epidemic, the global median of government health expenditure that goes to mental health is less than 2%. So when you take all the money we spend worldwide, we're spending about 2% on mental health everywhere in the world. These facts require that we depend on each other, that we take care of ourselves. We cannot wait for governmental assistance to come because we've been waiting. So we have to do that for each other. We have each other. We have support systems, health services, and more than that, as individuals, we have the ability to choose the best for ourselves. But the question is, will we do the work? A diagnosis never defines anyone. In our imperfection, we are perfectly made. Now, as a Superior Court judge, I would often do quotes in court, and that's one that I came up with, because I think sometimes we think we've got to have this picture of what we're supposed to be and what life is supposed to look like. Newsflash, no one has that picture. Kanye doesn't have it, we know that. Neither does Kim have it. Nobody we know of any stature has a perfect life. They show you what they want you to see on social media, but life is never that way because no one lives a perfect life. But in our perfection, we're perfectly made. And I didn't have any religious tones in my speech, but I'm going to put this there. The reason why I could come up with that quote is because I believe we're all made by God. He is our source, and He doesn't make any junk. And everything we go through is for the benefit of helping ourselves and ultimately helping somebody else. Because whether we recognize it or not, we're here for each other. Not for ourselves, we're here for each other. And so everybody under the sound of my voice can be a part of helping someone get better and do better in life, because it's not just about you. This is not your journey alone. My great friend Terry. Is that Terry Hatcher? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. God, she looks just like Terry. Okay. Oh, I had an assistant, Terry Hatcher, and you look just like her from afar. Okay, so I'm getting back on pitch. Okay. A diagnosis is the beginning of a solution. We're so fortunate now to live in an age where we have medicines and treatments to ensure that full lives can be possible for anybody, for everybody. It is simple. Taking medication does not make you weak. Meds are just a pinch of salt, a little seasoning in life, if you will. Think about it. A pinch of salt, a little seasoning in life, nothing different than taking that pill for high blood pressure. Why do we look at it differently? And that's what I used to tell people in court all the time. What difference does it make? I take medicine for my allergies. That doesn't make me less than someone who doesn't have allergies. It's just a part of my life I have to deal with. So I've seen the transformation in lives of those who come to accept their diagnosis and learn to love themselves. I had the honor, as Pastor Robinson said, in my career to serve as the mental health court accountability judge in Macon, Georgia. I coined the term making healing count. We went by MHC, and so I came up with a designation that was something different because I did not like the fact that people were being defined by an illness and saying mental health. I don't like that term. So our court was called Making Healing Count because that's what it was about. Making healing really matter and letting people know that they were more powerful than what they even imagined. And sometimes I think we don't recognize our gifts because we don't believe in our own power. But every single person has power, and there's a purpose and a plan to every life, no matter what you go through. Because none of us look like what we've gone through, probably. I know you all don't know a lot that I've gone through just looking at me and putting position. And sometimes I say this at my next event, I'm going to say that this tells you what I do. It doesn't tell you who I am. And that's the most important story. That doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is who I am on the inside. And that's what should matter to each of you all. Your past, and I'm going to tell you like I used to tell people in court, your past is your past. It means nothing unless you pick it back up. And other people who tell you about your past, they don't know your future and they don't know who you serve. So you can't listen to that. That's the negativity of life that's designed to keep us from our full purpose. And I don't ever want you all to leave a space and a time. And guess what? When you mess up, the only thing you have to do is get up. And we keep moving forward. Okay, now I'm going back to my notes. Okay. I was honored to assist in that program where I saw people, men and women, young and seasoned, because I'm getting seasoned, so I don't like to say old, young and seasoned, and I saw them accept their diagnosis, work through confronting their past criminal behavior and brokenness, and face their past actions that led to many of the consequences they confronted in life. And as a result of confronting the past, you can move from the past, but until you never acknowledge the past, own it, and move from it, it keeps coming back. So you got to let it go. Once you've dealt with it, let that go and let God and move forward. So you would be amazed how many participants in Making Healing Count changed the trajectory of their lives. One of them, I did something you're not supposed to do as a judge. I would give my cell phone numbers out to some of my participants. And one of them, when she came into our program, she had gone through, what do you call it? The boot camp. Y'all help me out. What's that called? When you go through the boot camp where you're there for 8 weeks. Not RSAT? Yeah, RSAT. She had gone through RSAT twice, about to be kicked out the second time. And so they brought her to me and they said, well, Judge, RSAT's about to kick her out. Or maybe they had kicked her out for the second time and they wanted to enter her into the Making Healing Count. And I looked at her, I said, if you can't get through RSAT, where it's more structured than anything, for the second time, I said, I don't know what I can do for you in Making Healing Count because you get to go home every day. So if we can't trust you there, how can I trust you on the outside? And she looked at me in the eye. She said, Judge, I'm going to complete this program. I said, I don't think so, but we're going to try it. And boy, did she prove me wrong. And I told her through every phase, we would share her testimony together about how once she had a made up mind, it was made up. And that's why I'm saying the past is just the past unless you pick it back up. 2 times through RSAT, and guess what? You know how it's a certain number of weeks. Well, she was doing so bad, even though she had been 2 times, it was really like she was there 3.5 times because they started her back over the first time. And so the second time they did the same thing before they said, okay, she's got to go. And so she is now fully employed. She had been on meth, and so as a result, she would go to the dentist, get a tooth pulled to get that pain medicine. You all probably have heard how people do that sometimes, and so her mouth was all messed up. She has now gotten her teeth straight. She has a significant other. She's being a testimonial person with her children, one whom is incarcerated now, and we go to lunch or breakfast every so often. I have seen transformations, and I know they're real. And it's all about us investing in each other. So many have become successful. They now see their own worth while being true to the treatment regimen. And she would often get up and tell people in phase 1 of our court, if you work the program will work you to where you need to be. But if you don't want to work this program, she'd tell her, y'all get out. Because Judge Coleman spent too much time talking to us to mess up. And so, she was helping other people along the way, and she served as a mentor while she was in our program. This is why this conference to me is so very important, and thank you for putting this on. This matters. I am hopeful that each of you, regardless of whether you have a mental health diagnosis, you love someone who does, you support those who are healing or recovering, or you just recognize the need to ensure that everyone knows their value. Remember that all our strengths can be effectively handled if we remember three things. And this is the crux of what I want to say to you all: acceptance, treatment, and wellness. Acceptance is the ability to unconditionally value all parts of who you are, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And I'm going to leave my notes again. I had to learn to do that too. All of us have something about ourselves that we kind of don't like. And we use that thing we kind of don't like to tell us what we can't do in life. Am I right? Okay. See, that's how you know I'm real, because I'm speaking from my own experience. And we got to stop doing that. We got to recognize that we're valuable just as we are. And guess what? If I were imperfect in some ways, I couldn't say what I'm saying to you all today. The one thing I didn't like about me, because my mom would fuss about it, is I'm so real and open. And she would say, you tell too much. You should just keep that. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to keep that. Later on, I'll share with you all why I don't keep my stuff. I share. But I realized that thing that I was told was imperfect, that's what makes me effective. Because I'm willing to put it out there and share it with the world. I don't have any hidden agendas. I tell people all the time, I'm an open book. Ask me whatever you want to. Because my thought is, that's why I'm here, to help you along your journey. And if I'm not authentic, then I can't be of any service. So acceptance, the ability to unconditionally value all parts of who you are. Our imperfections don't make us unworthy. Our imperfections make us human. They ensure that we are multidimensional, and more importantly, our imperfections ensure that we maintain empathy for others. If we can't acknowledge our own imperfections, how do we not get mad at other people who make us mad because of some behavioral defect they have? And we meet those every day. Sometimes we're that person, right? So that's right. So, we have to maintain empathy for others. So that's acceptance. Second, treatment. Treatment can and does make all the difference. If you look after your mind and body, your mind and body can look after you. If you look after your mind and body, your mind and body can look after you. But that's what you don't pay attention to, won't pay attention to you. Adherence to medical treatments can resolve many ills. However, I think our society does so much harm to our peace of mind. Each person must remember we are more than the worst thing we've ever done. That's coined by Brian Stevenson, who opened the center in Alabama, social justice. But we are more than the worst thing we've ever done. And we all have to remember that. We all deserve love and all the good the world has to give. But we should never define ourselves by societal standards, much of which is never achieved by anyone. What matters is family, true friends, self-love, and before all of that, God. I think much of our suffering comes from trying to be and do something that we were never intended to be or do. Do I need to say that again? I think much of our suffering comes from trying to be something or someone we were never intended to be or do. What happened to just learning the value of contentment? We live in a world now where everything's got to make you feel like you on a level 10. That's just not realistic. Sometimes, with all I've done in my life, I'll drive around when I have to go to events in Buckhead and I see those big houses and I'm like, man, that's a beautiful house. I'd like to live in. And I have to watch myself and I'm like, but why can't I be content? And we have to be mindful of that. We have to practice mindfulness. Be content. Everybody's not going to have the same thing. And guess what? A lot of those people live fabulously, but they're miserable. And we see it on the news when you see something happen. Think, oh my God, Tom Brady's getting a divorce. Oh my God, we thought his life was perfect. Nobody lives a perfect life. Nobody lives a perfect life. Nobody has everything. Everybody struggles. And he said in that latest interview, he said, I'm just trying to live life like everybody else. I'm just making it day to day. And so if we can put that in a box and just learn to be content, Because I think we use happy too much. And we equate that to some things that are unattainable or stuff. We equate happiness to stuff. And have you all ever noticed something? This used to happen to me a lot when I was younger. I want to go to the mall because I see something I like and I want to buy it. I'm like, ooh, I'll be happy. And you get the thing and you might wear it and then you're like, okay, what's next? Like, and that's why you know it's got to be something on the inside. Because the stuff on the outside never does the trick for long term. Dope, not. Significant others, not. The stuff that does the trick for the long term is the stuff that's inside, that you can't pull out, but you feel. So we have to, and that's why we have to be careful about using people or things or situations as our crux for determining our happiness. So we need to learn to listen that life will never be perfect. We will never have all we want or sometimes maybe not even all we need, but it can still be a beautiful world, a beautiful existence if we learn to be content. Lastly, we must be committed to wellness. Wellness is defined as the act of practicing healthy habits on a daily basis to attain better physical and mental health outcomes so that instead of just surviving, you're thriving. Read that again. The act of practicing healthy habits on a daily basis to attain better physical and mental health outcomes so that instead of surviving, you're thriving. That's what we want to do. We want to live healthy lives. We want to achieve wellness. It's so important that we practice healthy habits. Healthy habits are part of any treatment plan. I would even talk to people about what we eat, Last night, I asked my husband, what do we eat for dinner? He said, I'm doing fried pork chops. I'm like, that's okay, I'll get a salad. That's not healthy eating. Now, you can do that sometimes, but, So we gotta think about that in every aspect, whether it's physical or mental. Someone told me today, you have got to slow down. You need to give yourself a break. And I don't know how to do that because for me, my purpose in life, I think God created me to say yes when there's a need to say yes. And so I just ask him for more strength. But I do have to listen to that because it's a part of maintaining my physical and my mental health. So healthy habits include the messages we say to ourselves in our heads. It's beyond what we eat, the medicine we take, what you play back in your head. That's a part of your health too. When you notice yourself doing things negative, saying negative things to yourself, say, And I had to practice this, guys. I used to have to practice looking in the mirror and say, I love you. You're worth my time. You're worth my effort. And I know y'all are guys, and so guys, some men don't like to do that, so you can do it when nobody's looking. But we all need to do that. I love you. You matter. And some days when you look good, take a step back and say, woo, I'm looking really good today. That'll get you through a day when you don't say it. We have to learn to do that. We have to learn to give ourselves those positive messages. Like I used to say to myself when I was growing up, and I didn't, and I'm now sharing much more than I thought I would, but I didn't feel like I was very attractive, and I would say to myself, you may not be a pretty girl, but at least you're very smart and you're kind, and those things matter. You know what I'm saying? So some things you can't make yourself believe it because you just don't believe it, right? But those things that you know you've got, own those things and make yourself proud of those things. And those things will give you the confidence when you feel like you lack other things and other aspects. And I'm just keeping it real because, we need to do that with one another, right? So remember, you don't have to heal completely to declare that something's in the past. It is anything and everything. Those issues, those past emotional and invisible injuries may still hurt, but remember, we're working every day to move past the past. Remember, when you want different for yourself, you have to start moving differently. When you want different, you got to move different. Old keys don't unlock new doors. Old keys don't unlock new doors. If you don't remember anything else I say to you, remember that one. So if it's the old way we used to do things, the old way we used to think, the old way we used to move, the old places we used to go, that's not going to bring us to the newness we're looking for. And I know the biggest deterrent to moving past what we know is fear. It's the biggest deterrent. It's a deterrent for me. The only reason why I'm sitting here with you today as a justice is because my faith had grown where I was willing to move past fear. But this is what I used to tell my kids in Sunday school. Faith and fear can't live in the same place at the same time, at the same level. You got to always choose one. So the question becomes, whenever you feel fearful, what am I choosing today? And if you choose fear, you feel bad if you have any inkling of who Christ is and what he's done in your life. So then you have to just choose faith. So I chose faith when I said yes to being a judge, knowing every 4 years I had to hope people would vote me in when I had a kid about to go to college. And I was 14 years in with the office with Peter, the U.S. attorney, excuse me. But he's my friend. When I was 14 years in, I left before I got full retirement. I was a single mom, 2 kids. But I said, Lord, if you have that for me, then you've already paved the way, regardless of what happens. And so I moved out in faith. So I'm telling you all, move out in faith. The good water, the clean water is when you move in faith. That new horizon, that paradise, that's over there when you move out in faith. But if you stay where it's comfortable because you're scared, you're going to always keep getting the same thing you always got. So just remember, old keys don't unlock new doors. That little girl with the dad who silently suffered with bipolar because he refused to accept his diagnosis, that was me and my dad. That's why I told him to shh. I was like, he has never said that publicly. I'm like, really? That was me and my dad. His diagnosis never defined him. It simply refined him to be the man that I love dearly. Because he didn't value acceptance, he never accepted his diagnosis. And had he not been admitted to a facility when I was 24, let me tell you how God works. And I got to give my testimony so y'all won't ever go back to the past. So when I got out of law school, you would think I'd get a job easiest in Georgia because, I'm from Georgia. I went to UGA for law school. My first job was in Charlotte, North Carolina. Guess who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina? My dad. We were estranged. I didn't even invite him to my law school graduation because he didn't help my mom, who worked in food service her whole life, but he was an investigator with EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, wore a suit and tie every day. Nobody would know he was bipolar, right? Wore a suit and tie every day. He wouldn't help my mom pay for my the bar exam, to take the bar exam and take the course. He wouldn't give her any money, so my mom got a credit card and maxed it out for me to be able to take the bar. Sometimes when I say that, I almost cry because I'm like, the mother's love. But my dad loved me. He just had an illness. And so once I was up there, his best friend found out I was there, and he called me when my dad was admitted to the facility because he had cycled down to the point that he was involuntarily admitted. And so he never accepted his diagnosis. Treatment. He only got treatment because at one point, and now I'm being totally transparent, I don't know why, but anyway, I move where the Spirit moves me. At one point when he cycled out of himself, he was in Augusta and hit a well-to-do Caucasian older woman in the mouth because he thought she had killed Martin Luther King. But because of who he was and his job, and the family found out that, oh my God, he has to have a mental illness because he was at the top of his game. He was an investigator for equal employment opportunity. And then they found out that I was an attorney. He wouldn't reach out to me, but his attorney reached out and said, if we want to keep your dad out of prison, this family is very well-to-do in this community, you need to write a letter. And so I wrote a letter telling them all the good things he did growing up in my life, but now I get it. A lot of the missing pieces I now understand. He was bipolar and he wasn't taking medicine, so he would go in, he would cycle in and out. And so they put him on 20-year probation. For 20 years, he took his medicine dutifully because he knew if he didn't take that medicine, they would put him in prison. Someone who wears a suit and tie and worked for the federal government for 30 years doesn't want to go to jail. So he took his medicine every day like he was supposed to. They had him checking it with somebody in North Carolina to make sure, because of course he committed the offense in Georgia and Augusta. 20 years after the end of 20 years, guess what he did? He stopped taking his medicine. And he had one cycle too many. He was found in his house, had been deceased for about 2 weeks. When I got to the house, they wouldn't even let me go in to see him. But finally, I asked to see him when he was at the mortuary because I needed to know that was my dad. And I will never forget what that looked like. But I say all of this to say mental illness is real, and there's nothing wrong with it. Imagine the testimony he could have been at the top of his game if he would have accepted that, and how he could have helped professionals who were dealing with that, who didn't want, just imagine if. So isn't it ironic how God puts you where he wants you to be? I was supposed to say yes when the U.S. attorney at the time, Michael Moore, asked me to put my name in for the judgeship because I didn't even know that I would be presiding over what they call mental health court. That's why sometimes when you feel the Spirit telling you to make a move, make that move. That was the best thing I've ever done in my judicial career because I knew the value of that. So every year I put a chair next to my chair during Mental Health Month, and I would go through the story of my dad to explain to them why, because they didn't understand why I was so passionate. I'd go see people in facilities when they were admitted for treatment. I went to the facilities for their graduations. I think I came to a reentry graduation once. When my folks went someplace, I told them, tell me when you graduate, I'll be there. Sometimes my husband went with me. One time my daughter went with me because I'm all in. And I needed them to know why I'm all in. And so I share that with you all to say today, if anyone under the sound of my voice struggles in that way, you have family members, or for those providers who help people who struggle in that way, understand that people just need to know that it's okay. And sometimes sharing our own story and plight makes people know it's okay. And I think me sharing empowered the people who came through my court. Because they said, Judge Colvin's dad had bipolar just like me. And I'm like, yeah, and it's okay. But he never got to see me become a judge, and he would have been more proud of that than anybody in my family, because he was big into the secular stuff that doesn't matter. But yeah, so here I am. So what I want to say to you all, that the reason why we're all here today is because we recognize that it's the wounds of the heart and the mind that hurt. And so let's take this serious. Let's do what we have to do for ourselves, for those who we love, and for those that we care about. So thank you all so much for having me. Oh, yeah. No, I've got, yeah.
Questions for Justice Colvin? Any questions at all? I know
And
somebody's got to have a question.
And I told y'all I'm an open book, so.
Because I've got a question.
Okay, you want to wait for somebody else to do a question? Okay. So he's not going to ask his question until one of you all make up a question, so go for it.
She's always told me that shoes make her happy. Is that not?
They just make her happy momentarily, but you make her content.
That's why I have so many shoes. It doesn't.
That's right. Doesn't keep it going. That's right. It's only momentary.
So Peter Leary, Mr. Peter Leary, went to the University of Virginia. And you're from Oconee County. You're from Atlanta. And you went to Sweetbriar.
In Virginia, yeah.
Is this a thing in the U.S. Attorney's Office? How
No.
did you end up at Sweetbriar from?
Okay, I'll tell. So you all can pick up that I had some self-esteem issues growing up. I think that's from my dad's issue. I figured it out when I was 24. The reason why I, didn't have a lot of confidence or felt unsure, because my dad wasn't giving me those things that I think only a father can give a daughter. So if you got any daughters in here, you need to be taking her out on dates. Every time you see her, you are the most beautiful thing in the world. You need to open a door for her. That's how girls learn that they're valuable. And so because my dad struggled with mental, he didn't do those things for me. So I grew up being very strong-minded, like I got to do this, I got to do that. So I kind of had that sense of I had to accomplish things versus just, I don't know, the things you pick up, I guess, as a young lady growing up. So because of that, even though I was like number 3 in my class, my graduating class, and Harvard and Yale had sent me, you know how they send the top students applications to fill out. They sent me an application to fill out, and I looked, neither of my parents went to college. So how did my dad become an EEOC investigator? Because he has the gift of gab. He just looks like $1 million. But neither of my parents went to college. And so I thought, when I got the application, I'm like, and I went to public school in Atlanta, not one of the ones that was considered the premier public schools. And I thought, who am I to think I could go to Harvard or Yale? But Sweetbriar was a small all-women's college. They actually wrote me a handwritten note and spelled my name right. The big colleges wrote those, typed letters, and sometimes they spell Verda wrong because it's a unique name. And so I was like, I know if I go there, they'll care about me. They'll promote my success. But what I didn't realize is as a result of going to a smaller school like that, I had time to kind of get to know me. And that's where I learned to love me in college, which is funny because most kids in college are learning to have a good time and, they're gaining social skills. Well, I had social skills. I needed to spend some time with me. And as a result of going there, I did. When I graduated from college, I just felt like I could do anything I wanted to do. And those 4 years did that for me. So that's why I went to Sweetbriar.
That's neat, because I know Sweetbriar. Most people don't know Sweetbriar College in Virginia because it's a small little women's college.
But they are so wealthy. That's the first time I realized what rich meant. I mean, when you go to school and girls are driving up in Lamborghinis, they had what is that car that starts with a B, really expensive? Not the Bentley, but it's some kind of Italian. Yes, one drove up in a Bugatti. What is his name? Lasordo's daughter went there, the guy who used to, the Dodgers guy? Yeah, his daughter went there. First time I saw a presidential Rolex, like no numbers, just diamonds. One guy came to pick up his girlfriend for a date. He landed his helicopter on top of the dorm. Two twins, their maids came to unpack them at school. So it was culture shock for me. And I was probably one of 4 African Americans at the school. So it was culture shock. But it was good that I experienced that because that had never been a part of my world. And I think sometimes college students don't realize you need to go to a place where you're going to learn a part of the world or something about life that you don't already have. Because that's what education to me really is about. Anybody can. Okay. We went to University of Georgia School of Law together. And Robert was really smart. He was like number 2 or something in our class. Yeah.
Wow. Well, my wife went to Mary Baldwin.
Oh, yes. So that's why I know you were sisters.
Yeah. I went to school in Virginia. And
okay.
When I went to school, I went to VMI.
Oh, yeah.
And around VMI, because VMI at the time was all male.
Yeah.
And then around
you all would come down to our school for keg parties.
Were 5 female colleges.
Yep.
People ask me, how did you go to all male college? I said, because there were 5 female colleges.
Yeah, exactly.
So we knew Sweetbriar, and I was like, how did she end up?
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with this.
Sweetbriar and BMI would, I guess, charter buses to bring them back and forth to go to parties and stuff. It was crazy. Yeah.
No, serious question.
Did your faith and stuff, did your mother instill that in you?
Yeah, okay, so my mother's mom she started her own church. My mother's mom, a holiness church. And so I spent a lot of time with her. My mom put me, much to my father's chagrin when they were married, because they divorced when I was 6. My mom put me in private religious school from pre-K until 4th grade, and he thought it was ridiculous to pay for school. But I say all the time that being in that environment did more to define who I am and my commitment to service than anything else in my life. And my parents just poured into that, because my dad was extremely religious, spiritual, whichever one you want to say. His thought was, if you're living on Sunday, you're at a church. And I think that kind of helped keep him kind of on track, because people will use different things when they're not medicated. So he was very big in church. And so all of those factors combined are the basis for my faith and why everything I do is about my service to him. I say all the time, my life is yours. Just protect my children. That was my only prayer. Yeah. Anybody else? They're ready to go home, Pastor. Thank you all. Oh, yes. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. That's what it's about, That's what it's about.
You said something, and I'll leave you with this. There's Tim Elmore just came out with a book. I'm not, if you're familiar with Tim Elmore, he's a leadership writer. And the name of it, I heard him speak about a month ago. I was at a conference. He was one of the speakers. And you said something about contentment. And it's interesting because he does a presentation. The name of his new book is called The New Diversity. And it's written towards corporate America. And it covers a broad spectrum of issues. But one of the issues that it crosses is the issue of I'm right on the border of baby boomer and what is that, Gen X, whatever the next
Yeah.
one is. I'm right there, 64, 65, right? And he talks about, you have somebody in the workforce who's a baby boomer, and you have somebody in the workforce who's a millennial.
Yeah.
And but he says this is interesting. These are interesting. He said, we know what the greatest generation was, right? The greatest generation was that World War II generation. Well, the generation prior to that was the builder generation. And it was the builder generation because they built. You had the Rockefellers and the and all those, the Vanderbilts and all those people. Then you had the World War II generation. And the builder generation built. The World War II, the greatest generation, they sacrificed. The Gen X generation came up, and because of the sacrifice and all of it, they wanted to be served. So that's the service generation. We went from building to services, right? And then he said the Generation Y came along. And Generation Y is not just about service, but it's experience. Now, I don't want to just be served. I want an experience. He said, and then the next generation came along, and they went from service to experience to not just experience, but I want an experience that blows my mind. I want a transformation. And it's interesting how that really leaves contentment as being, because I'm always searching for something bigger. Each generation is searching for something bigger and better. And I thought about that when you said contentment is so
Underrated, and I think that's what we need to focus on, being content.
Yeah. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is wonderful.
I know. Well, folks, I am going to, it's 4:40, and I am so glad. We were not sure what time she was going to get here, and we were thinking closer to 5, but I'm glad that you're here early, and we can get her to her next event. And but I thank you for being here. We're going to do this again in January, probably different format and different times and things like that, but we're looking for it. So when that information comes out, I want you to invite. I want you to let's expand this group. The things that Justice Colvin talked about, and who else? Maybe it was you who just said that we can't wait for the government to fix these things. And we said earlier today that the reason we're doing this is because we can't wait. If we're waiting for the government to fix this, we have to do something as a community. We have to figure out ways to encourage one another, love on one another, and help one another. So, and that tied right into what we said earlier. So that was superb. So, but thank you for being here. I'm going to dismiss you, and I'm not sure, guys. I'm not sure what your direction is here from Chris or anybody. So, going home. That's right. Let's just make sure we're cleaned up out here. I don't know what it looks like out there because I haven't been out there since we've been in here. So we're good. All right. I'm going to pray us out of here, and then we're going to be dismissed. Father, thank you for a great day. We've been here since lunch, and it has been a long day. It's almost 5 o'clock. And Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to speak truth on some issues, to just be honest with each other. We thank you for the testimonies. Thank you for David and for Brad and Joni and for Justice Colvin, and there is sacrifice to come this way and speak to these great people here, Lord. I pray that we'll take something away. I certainly have a lot of notes to go home and comb through and just process. So we thank you for the wisdom that was spoken today and the practical advice. We thank you and we love you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.